Hey everyone, tonight we journey into the heart of one of history's most unsettling mysteries. In the summer of 1934, a British-led team descended into a newly uncovered shaft beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza. They carried cutting-edge instruments, notebooks, and a belief that they were about to solve the last great secret of ancient Egypt. But they never returned. The official reports were sealed, the photographs confiscated, and every name connected to the expedition was erased from the records. Only fragments survived: a charred journal, a damaged audio cylinder, and seismic readings that repeat one impossible pattern. A pulse every 6 seconds, still rising from the earth beneath the pyramid. This is not a story of myth or superstition. It's a story of sound, geometry, and something older than civilization. Tonight, we'll trace that signal through lost archives, forgotten experiments, and a silence that behaves like memory. So settle in, close your eyes, and breathe with the rhythm of the earth itself. 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Because somewhere under the sand, a machine older than language may still be running, waiting for someone to listen. It began on a humid evening in June 1934, when the city of Cairo glowed faintly beneath a veil of dust and heat. At the British-Egyptian base camp beside the Great Pyramid of Khufu, a low radio hum drifted through the desert air. The hour was 7:42 p.m. and the signal operator on duty, Private Ellis Ward, was recording the day's final check-in from the expedition team, descending the new shaft beneath the pyramid. "Descending now," came the voice, faint and metallic. Visibility low, air pressure falling. Ward logged the message, then waited for the usual follow-up status reports, lamp counts, distance markers, but none came. Instead, the transmission broke into static, followed by a single, rhythmic pulse. Tap. Pause. Tap. It repeated 6 times, then vanished. The frequency 37.4 MHz was one reserved for military engineering teams. When Ward adjusted the tuner, the sound did not fade as static normally does. It simply stopped, as if the air itself had gone silent. He called for a repeat signal. No response. At 8:10 p.m., the expedition was declared unresponsive. Colonel Howard Vance, the team's leader, had led 6 men and 1 woman linguist, Margaret Keane, into the narrow limestone shaft discovered weeks earlier through seismic imaging. Their goal was to follow what instruments described as an anomalous cavity, 40 meters beneath the king's chamber. They carried carbide lamps, air pressure meters, and a single cable-linked microphone wired to the surface. The last voice on that line belonged to Keane. Ward later testified that her tone had changed, not afraid, but strained, as though speaking into heavy wind. Moments before the radio fell silent, she said something difficult to decipher. When amplified decades later by the Egyptian Antiquities Authority, the recording seemed to capture a single word. The rescue attempt began at dawn. The surface team, led by Egyptian foreman Khalid Tariq, widened the shaft entrance using mechanical drills. The first 30 meters showed normal progress chalk markings every 2 meters, just as the team had planned. But at the 36th mark, the line of chalk ended. The wall beyond was smooth, as if recut or melted. There were no footprints, no rope lines, no tools, only the faint smell of burnt metal and the echo of dripping water deep below. By evening, the British authorities had sealed off the area. The official explanation issued to the press described a minor collapse within an exploratory passage, though the seismic records from the Helwan Observatory show no tremor that night, not even a localized vibration. Over the next 72 hours, the base radio continued to pick up fragments on the same frequency, small bursts of noise that oscillated precisely every 8 minutes. Technicians described them as self-repeating interference, a pattern more deliberate than random static. Ward was ordered to stop recording, but he disobeyed. In his private log, now stored at the British Museum archives, he wrote, It feels like the pyramid is transmitting something back. No official transcript of those signals has ever been released. The Egyptian Antiquities Department closed the shaft permanently in July 1934, welding a copper plate across the entrance. The following year, the British Engineering Corps returned to dismantle the camp. They found the radio equipment scorched from within, the copper wiring fused into black glass. No one ever found the missing expedition, but every June since 1934, precisely at 7:42 p.m, local radio operators near Giza report a brief surge of static on the same band, 37.4 MHz, always lasting 6 seconds, always ending in silence, and so began the story of the expedition that vanished beneath the Great Pyramid, waiting for answers. By dawn, Cairo was already awake. The desert air carried the scent of diesel and dust, and across the Nile, a thin mist clung to the rooftops. From the balconies of Giza's colonial hotels, journalists watched the convoy of army trucks move toward the plateau, silent, deliberate, sealed under canvas. Soldiers blocked the roads leading to the Great Pyramid, turning away tourists and traders alike. Rumors spread faster than the sandstorms that followed them. Some said the explorers had struck a pocket of gas, others that the shaft had collapsed, swallowing them whole. Yet no tremor had been felt, and no plume of dust had risen from the plateau. The ground remained calm, as though nothing had happened at all. In the early hours, the Ministry of Antiquities issued a brief statement. All members of the British Egyptian survey team are accounted for and under review. But the truth was already slipping through the cracks. Locals who worked the night shift at the tram depot swore they'd heard sirens near the pyramid long after midnight, followed by the sound of heavy machinery. One driver described an orange glow pulsing from the site before disappearing behind the dunes. The British authorities moved quickly to contain the story. Telegraph lines between Cairo and London carried coded cables marked urgent, restricted circulation. At the British Embassy, an aide recorded a call between Colonel Fairburn, head of the Engineering Corps, and a man identified only as Director, Section K. Fairburn's words were calm, but strained. "We have a containment issue, not structural. Sealing it won't be enough." The call ended without explanation. That morning, the Cairo Gazette printed a single column about an unfortunate mechanical failure at Giza. But by noon, the paper was pulled from the stands. When it reappeared the next day, the article was gone. In its place, a notice about an upcoming royal visit. Meanwhile, the camp at the pyramid had transformed into something unrecognizable. Every photograph, sketch, and recording from the expedition was confiscated under the Official Secrets Act. Hamid el-Rashid, the Egyptian geological advisor, his statement was brief. "There has been an air pocket collapse. Recovery efforts are unsafe." Yet when asked if any debris had been retrieved, he hesitated. There is nothing to recover. For days, the city buzzed with speculation. In the markets, people whispered of curses, of ancient traps awakened. But the scholars at the university were more skeptical. Professor Ahmed Youssef, an expert in geophysical mapping, insisted that the plateau cannot conceal voids large enough to swallow an entire team without trace. He submitted a formal request for the seismic logs from the British survey. His letter was never answered. By the third day, the crowds at the site grew restless. Dozens gathered behind the barricades, holding lanterns through the night, staring toward the pyramid's base where the shaft entrance had once been. A few claimed they could still hear a low hum beneath the sand, an almost inaudible vibration that came and went with the wind. On the fourth morning, soldiers began covering the entrance with limestone blocks, sealing it shut for good. The onlookers watched in silence. Among them stood a young boy, no more than 12, clutching a scrap of paper, one of the chalk markers dropped by the team before they disappeared. On it, faintly smudged, the number 36. The city returned to its rhythm. The incident soon buried under politics and heat. Yet each night, as the sun fell behind the pyramids, a faint radio pulse echoed through the static, a 6-second reminder that beneath the desert, something still stirred, and those who listened closely swore the sound was growing louder. Before the headlines, before the silence, there were 7 of them. Ordinary in appearance, but chosen with purpose. Colonel Howard Vance, a soldier-turned-engineer, led the team. At 46, he had mapped tunnels beneath Ypres during the war, and once designed flood channels in Sudan. He believed that precision more than courage kept men alive underground. With him was Dr. Amin el-Masri, a geologist from Alexandria, known for his steady hands and unflinching logic. He had studied the structure of the Giza Plateau for years and claimed that beneath the limestone crust lay a honeycomb of unknown chambers. His instruments, barometers, galvanometers, seismographs were the best Egypt possessed in 1934. Linguist Margaret Keane joined as the team's recorder and translator. Fluent in Greek, Coptic, and 3 forms of ancient hieratic, she had spent her early career cataloguing funerary texts at the British Museum. Her journals, recovered decades later, reveal a voice both methodical and strangely poetic. The stone hums differently each morning, as if it remembers. 2 assistants from the Egyptian Museum, brothers named Abbas and Hafez Naguib, were tasked with cataloguing artifacts on site. They had been diggers before, young, strong, accustomed to the airless dark of tomb shafts. Finally, 2 porters from Saqqara, Saeed Ibrahim and Yusuf Halim, completed the group. Both had families waiting by the river. Neither would return. The expedition was sanctioned under the Joint Antiquities Survey, a cooperative venture between Cairo and London intended to modernise archaeological record-keeping. But unofficial memos suggest another motive, tracing a rumoured chamber of resonance mentioned in late dynastic papyri. These texts spoke of a place where the breath of Ra is stored. Most scholars dismissed it as metaphor. Vance did not. On June 10th, 2 days before descent, the team assembled at the base camp beside the north face of the Great Pyramid. Photographs taken that morning show them smiling stiffly beside stacked equipment, carbide lamps, oxygen tanks, surveying rods. The air looks still, the shadows sharp. Behind them, the limestone blocks rise like the side of a mountain, indifferent and immense. Their instructions were clear. Follow the newly revealed corridor to its end. Measure every 10 meters and record air composition at intervals. Vance believed the shaft might lead to a sealed water channel, perhaps part of a forgotten hydraulic system used during the pyramid's construction. At 9:40 a.m. on June 12th, the descent began. The first to enter was Dr. El-Masri, carrying a lantern fixed to his helmet. Keane followed with the recording slate, the Naguib brothers behind her, then the porters with supply packs. Vance entered last, lowering himself by rope, boots scraping limestone dust into the dark. Witnesses at the surface described a cool draft rising from below, dry, metallic, and faintly electric. At 10:12, the last light vanished into the passage. For a few minutes, the sound of hammering echoed up the shaft. Then quiet. By midday, a surface assistant noted faint vibrations through the rope line, like the distant hum of machinery. The instruments recorded a steady drop in barometric pressure. When Ward, the radio operator, called down for a routine report, the response came delayed, blurred by static. All well, continuing 30 meters strange airflow. Those would be the final ordinary words spoken from below the Great Pyramid. For the next hour, the static changed, rhythm rising, then falling, like breath. The men who went below were never seen again, yet even now, in museum archives and private letters, their names remain linked to one phrase scratched in the margin of Keane's recovered notes. The air is alive. It began, as many discoveries do, not with revelation, but with a tremor, a faint, rhythmic pulse that no one could explain. In late May 1934, the sands at Giza shivered for 6 seconds. The vibration was too small to register on national seismographs, yet strong enough to rattle a cup from a table inside the field tent of Dr. Amin el-Masri. He had been testing a new seismic resonator designed at the University of Cairo, a crude device of copper coils and graphite filaments meant to detect underground voids. Most days, it recorded only the heartbeat of the desert, low-frequency hums from wind and shifting sand. But that morning, the needle jumped sharply, tracing a narrow spike at a depth of 40 meters directly beneath the pyramid's northern base. At first, el-Masri assumed it was interference, yet when he repeated the test, moving the coils 50 meters in each direction, the anomaly remained fixed, unblinking, as though something solid and hollow waited below. He presented the readings to Colonel Howard Vance, who examined them with a soldier's practicality. "If the readings are true," he said, "then there's a cavity where no chamber should exist." Within hours, a second test confirmed it, an echo lasting 0.7 seconds, precise and clean, rebounding as though off-polished stone. They compared the data to earlier French surveys from 1924. Nothing in the archives suggested such a void. The Great Pyramid had been mapped dozens of times, but always through traditional means, manual excavation and line measurement. No one had yet trusted the ground itself to speak. By nightfall, the camp was electric with speculation. Could it be an unfinished passage, a collapsed burial vault, or perhaps one of the mythical air shafts? The ancient texts alluded to channels meant to carry the pharaoh's spirit toward the stars. Vance remained cautious. "We'll know when we touch it," he told the crew. 2 days later, the drilling began. The surface team used a mechanical auger, capable of boring through limestone in narrow, meter-deep increments. At a depth of 8 meters, the drill struck a softer layer, resonant and dry. The bit returned coated in fine red dust, hematite-rich, alien to the plateau. Beneath that, the tone of the drill changed. Every rotation sent back a hollow ring, as if knocking against the skin of a great bell. At 17.4 meters, the auger broke through into open space. The workers heard the sigh of escaping air, cool and dry, smelling faintly of ozone and age. The pressure gauge fell by 2 units, confirming a sealed chamber. When they lowered a mirror and lamp into the hole, the reflection danced on smooth walls limestone, but darker, with veins of copper threading through like frozen lightning. The shaft beneath sloped downward at a perfect 27 degrees, its sides cut with uncanny precision. Vance ordered the team to halt until full clearance arrived from the ministry. But by morning, a new order came, signed jointly by the British Survey Office and Egypt's Antiquities Authority, granting immediate permission for limited exploratory entry. Margaret Keane recorded in her diary, "The corridor breathes cold. I feel watched from below." On June 9th, engineers removed the limestone plug sealing the upper entrance. The slab weighed just under 900 kilograms, yet lifted as though counterbalanced from beneath. A current of air swept upward, dry and electric, carrying with it the smell of copper and old smoke. The workers stepped back. Beneath them yawned a darkness no light could reach, and from that darkness came a single low sound, an echo so deep it seemed to pulse in the chest rather than the ears. El-Masri's instruments recorded the frequency. 16 hertz. Subsonic, identical to the human heartbeat at rest. They called it the Chamber of Breath. No one yet knew that once entered, it would never let them go. Long before the shaft was open to daylight, word of its discovery had already travelled the length of Cairo's underworld through backroom cafes, university corridors, and the quiet offices of men who preferred their names not to appear in newspapers. Egypt in the 1930 seconds was a crossroads of curiosity and control. Archaeologists, intelligence officers, and financiers, all orbiting the same ancient stones, each convinced they were the rightful inheritors of whatever secrets lay beneath them. The official record shows the expedition was funded by the Joint Antiquities Survey, a cooperative between the British Museum and the Egyptian Ministry. Documents uncovered in 1981 from the Colonial Archives suggest that a private London syndicate, calling itself the Osiris Group, financed the operation through an intermediary in Alexandria. Their aim, according to one surviving letter, was to locate evidence of pre-dynastic energy constructs. The letter was signed with initials only, E.R.H. Later researchers speculated it may have referred to Sir Ernest Richmond Halliday, an engineer once employed in electromagnetic research at Cambridge before his abrupt resignation in 1931. Halliday vanished from public records soon after. Around the same time, several crates labelled geophysical instruments for museum use arrived in Cairo from Southampton. Customs records describe copper rods, nickel spheres, magnetite discs, and a set of delicate vibration sensors resembling early accelerometers. None of these tools appear on the official equipment manifest of the Vance expedition. Dr. Amin el-Masri's surviving correspondence to the University of Cairo hints at unease. In one letter, dated May 30th, 1934, he wrote, "I no longer know which authority I am truly serving. The foreigners speak of resonance as if it were divine, not physical. Cairo at the time was thick with such whispers. Between the cafe tables of the Ezbekia Gardens, scholars and smugglers traded in papyri and secrets alike. Rumours told of foreign agents posing as photographers, of night meetings along the Nile where sealed envelopes exchanged hands. The city was a maze of loyalty, half scholarship, half espionage. When the news of the seismic anomaly reached these circles, interest sharpened. An underground collector known only as the German reportedly offered £2,000, a small fortune for any object recovered from below the breath line. 2 weeks later, an unmarked car was seen outside the excavation tent. Witnesses said a man in a grey suit spoke privately with Colonel Vance for nearly an hour. No record exists of that conversation, though the next day Vance ordered the team to prepare for descent immediately, despite incomplete safety checks. Margaret Keane noted the change in her field journal. "The Colonel is restless, as if pushed by an unseen deadline. We are told to hurry, though the sand is still shifting from the drills. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Antiquities demanded updates, but their cables were intercepted and rerouted through the British consulate. Even the Egyptian workers noticed the tension. One porter, Saeed Ibrahim, later told his wife that the foreigners brought boxes that hummed even when closed. By early June, the excavation site was under armed guard. Access required a signature from both governments and from one other entity, the Geological Intelligence Section, London. Historians have never found evidence that such an office officially existed. The deeper the expedition prepared to go, the more invisible its sponsors became. One journalist from Al-Ahram who attempted to photograph the dig was detained overnight and released without his camera. Something was moving beneath the sands, not just the rumble of drills, but the quiet machinery of politics, of hidden hands, steering curiosity into secrecy. And as the first shadows stretched across the plateau on June 12th, the men and women of the Vance expedition descended into the darkness, not knowing that they were already part of a story larger than themselves, because somewhere in the city that night, the radios had begun to hum again. The morning of June 12th dawned still and brittle, the kind of desert calm that feels like the pause before a storm. The workers gathered at the base of the Great Pyramid, their voices low, their eyes fixed on the limestone slab that had sealed the unknown for what might have been thousands of years. At precisely 10:47 a.m., under the supervision of Colonel Vance, the final chisel struck home. With a deep hollow groan, the stone shifted, releasing a breath of air that smelled faintly of copper and dust, dry, ancient, untouched. The slab weighed nearly 900 kilograms, yet it lifted more easily than expected, as though the darkness below had been waiting for the chance to exhale. Vance signalled to lower the carbide lamps. Their light fell into a steep, narrow passage cut directly into the bedrock, descending at a 27-degree angle. The walls were perfectly smooth, too smooth for primitive chisels. Under the lamp glow, the surface shimmered faintly, as if coated in a fine metallic dust. Dr. El-Masri ran his hands along the wall. The limestone felt unnaturally cool, almost cold enough to numb the skin. "There is no tool mark," he said quietly. "No fracture. It's as if the rock was poured, not carved. The shaft was just wide enough for a man to crawl through, shoulders scraping stone on either side." The first 10 meters sloped steadily downward before bending into a darkness that swallowed the light entirely. As they descended, the sound changed, no longer the muffled crunch of boots on sand, but a kind of soft resonance, like breathing inside a hollow chest. Keane described it later in her notes. "The sound seems to come from behind us, though the passage is closed. The air moves as if it remembers something." Every 2 meters, the team marked the wall with chalk and measured depth using a rope line. By the 20th mark, their voices began to echo back, distorted, overlapping slightly out of sync, as though delayed by a fraction of a second. El-Masri checked his instruments. The barometer showed a gradual drop in pressure. He recorded the figures: 760 mmHg at the surface, 742 at 30 meters, not dangerous, but strange for a sealed environment. At 35 meters, the passage widened briefly into a small alcove. There, they found something unexpected, a copper inlay embedded directly into the limestone, running horizontally like a seam. Its edges were smooth, almost melted into the rock. The metal gave off a faint, steady vibration when touched, similar to the hum of an electrical line. "Not a vein," El-Masri said, astonished. "A design." Vance wanted to take a sample, but when his hammer struck the inlay, the sound rang out like a bell, pure, long, and impossibly loud for such a confined space. The vibration lingered for nearly 30 seconds, travelling through the stone. After that, the air grew heavier. Their lamps flickered, dimmed, then steadied again. Keane wrote, "The flame leans forward, as though drawn downward by breath." By the time they reached 40 meters, the rope line had nearly run its full length. Vance ordered a halt. The floor beneath them was damp, polished, smooth, and scattered with fragments of a black mineral that glittered under the lanterns. At 11:32 a.m., the radio operator above ground received their final words. "Reaching chamber. Air dense. Continuing descent." Then, static. Later measurements taken at the site would reveal something even stranger. The copper seam aligned perfectly with the Earth's magnetic north. To the engineers, it was coincidence. To others, design. But from that moment on, the pyramid was no longer silent. Instruments left on the surface began to hum softly, as though the rock itself had joined in the signal, and beneath the stone, the darkness finally began to answer. When the surface team resumed radio contact at midday, the voices coming through were faint and distorted, muffled, as if travelling through water. The words were there, but bent by distance and interference. "Pressure stable," came Vance's voice, proceeding past marker 40. Then silence again, broken by a faint clicking noise that continued long after speech had ended. On the surface, Private Ellis Ward monitored the transmission with growing unease. The signal meter wavered erratically, bouncing between steady amplitude and near zero. He tried adjusting the gain, tapping the side of the receiver. Each time, the interference pulsed back stronger, forming a slow, rhythmic pattern. Tap, pause, tap, the same cadence he would later describe as almost human. Below ground, the temperature had dropped sharply. Their breath condensed in the lamplight, forming pale clouds that drifted upward, though no draft could be felt. Doctor. El-Masri wiped condensation from his instrument case and checked his readings. The thermometer showed 11 degrees Celsius, nearly 15 lower than the surface above. The pressure gauge continued to fall. "We are descending into colder air, but this should not be possible," he murmured. Keen recorded everything carefully, her handwriting precise despite the shaking of her hands. "The walls vibrate," she wrote. "The metal lines are not decoration. They respond when we speak faintly, like a second voice repeating ours." The team carried 3 main instruments: a barometer for air pressure, a galvanometer to detect magnetic fluctuation, and a hand-cranked sound recorder built by Pathé, using steel wire instead of tape. Every few minutes, El-Masri stopped to crank the device and capture the surrounding sound. Most of the playback was ordinary: dripping water, footsteps, the scrape of equipment. But once, only once, a deeper tone emerged, below the range of the human voice, a resonant hum that made the metal casings of the lamps tremble. At 38 meters, the shaft widened again. The walls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their lanterns threw a dull glow no brighter than the flame itself. The rock had changed colour from pale limestone to something darker, with a subtle sheen. When the geologist touched it, his fingertips came away dusted with black powder, metallic and fine like soot. Vance ordered a rest. The team sat in silence, the only sound the hiss of carbide lamps and the faint ticking of El-Masri's chronometer. Then, from somewhere deep below, a single tone rose long, drawn out, neither mechanical nor natural. It wavered once, then faded. The group looked at each other, but no one spoke. Keane described it later. It was not heard by the ears, but felt through the ribs, as if the body itself were being used to listen. When they resumed, the instruments began to malfunction. The galvanometer needle drifted erratically, oscillating even when disconnected from its coil. The sound recorder emitted a low feedback tone despite having no power source. Above ground, Ward logged the pattern of the radio static. The pulses were arriving at exact intervals every 8 minutes, lasting 6 seconds. He wrote in the margin, repeating source, not random. At 1:04 p.m., Vance reported reaching a copper door set directly into the rock. No hinges, no seams, perfect surface. He tapped it with a chisel. The sound rang out metallic and pure, echoing for what Ward later timed as 23 seconds. Then the voice came again, faint and calm. It was Keane. "We hear movement, not behind, not ahead." The transmission cut abruptly into static. For several minutes the surface operator sat frozen, waiting for the signal to return. But the instruments continued to click, perfectly timed, as if recording something unseen, each pulse exactly 6 seconds long, each one slightly louder than the last. By the afternoon of June 12th, the air around the Great Pyramid had grown unnaturally still. The wind that usually swept down from the desert plateau had died away. Even the flies that swarmed near the excavation tent seemed to vanish. On the surface, Private Ellis Ward leaned over the receiver, straining to catch anything human through the thick curtain of static. Then, faintly, a pattern emerged. Not words, not voices, something lower. A rhythm. He began to tap his pencil unconsciously in time with it. One pulse, pause, another pulse. The intervals were regular, precise, almost biological. Each repetition lasted 0.87 seconds, measured later from the wax cylinder recordings. Sound engineers who studied them decades afterward would confirm what Ward sensed instinctively that day. The frequency fell at exactly 16 Hz, the same frequency as a resting human heartbeat. At first, he thought it was interference from the surface generator. Below ground, the team had reached the copper door. Vance ordered them to pause while el-Masri examined the surrounding walls. They vibrated faintly, not from mechanical motion but from pressure waves that seemed to rise and fall like breathing. Every time someone spoke, the sound returned a fraction of a second later, slightly altered, as though the pyramid itself were answering. Keene described it in her notebook. The echo does not fade. It changes. It learns our rhythm and repeats it. When el-Masri placed his galvanometer against the stone, the needle quivered, then stabilized at a steady oscillation. Magnetic, but not random. He marked the numbers in his field log. Amplitude 0.4 Gauss, interval 8 minutes. Resonance, he said softly. But of what origin? The sound recorder picked it up too, a deep infrasonic murmur beneath the audible band. On playback, the noise formed repeating waves, perfectly symmetrical. No natural environment known at the time could produce such precision. Ward, above ground, began hearing the same pulse through the camp structures. The radio antenna trembled. The canvas walls of the tent quivered rhythmically, though the air outside was still. He stepped out into the desert light and found his compass spinning slowly in place, pointing nowhere. At 3:07 p.m., another signal came through, brief but distinct. Vance's voice. Light dimming, air heavy. We are recording. Possible vibration source ahead. The transmission ended with a short, sharp tone. 3 ascending notes. Those who later analysed the recording discovered that the tones matched a harmonic series of the original 16 Hz frequency. In other words, the echo wasn't merely repeating sound, it was building upon it. By sunset, the vibrations intensified. Rescue teams positioned seismographs around the pyramid to triangulate the source. Each device showed micro-tremors radiating upward from a point directly beneath the shaft, regular as a heartbeat, steady as a metronome. One engineer compared the data to the recordings of volcanic gas vents, where air moves through narrow fissures and produces tones. But this was different. The amplitude didn't decay. It held constant. Something beneath the pyramid was sustaining the vibration. In Cairo, when officials received Ward's reports, they dismissed them as mechanical error. Yet by evening, the static could be heard on civilian radios as far as the Nile embankment. Listeners described a low, pulsing hum that came and went every few minutes, followed by the brief crackle of silence as if something vast had inhaled. The descent into what would later be called the Chamber of Breath began just after dusk. The last traces of sunlight faded from the limestone blocks above as the surface team lit acetylene lamps, their orange glow trembling across the sand. Below, the expedition's lanterns flickered like sinking stars, swallowed by the earth. At 40 meters down, the air had changed. It no longer smelled of dust and copper, but of something older mineral, metallic, almost sweet. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees. Their breath misted and hung in the air longer than it should have, moving not upward, but sideways, drawn toward the walls. Dr. el-Masri held his lamp close and watched the flame bend. "The air moves against pressure," he murmured. "It's being pulled somewhere." They followed the slope until the passage widened into a vaulted space. The light pooled in front of them, revealing smooth stone curving upward in impossible symmetry. It was not carved, it was cast, poured, as if the rock had once been liquid. The walls shimmered with veins of copper that spiraled like the halls of a fingerprint. At the chamber's centre stood a plinth, waist-high, carved from a darker stone. Upon it lay a thin layer of black dust. When Keene brushed it aside, her fingertips tingled as if she'd touched static. "Magnetite," el-Masri whispered. "But magnetite doesn't form like this." Vance ordered a survey. They measured the space, 12 meters wide, 8 high, roughly circular but slightly oblong like a lung. The floor dipped subtly in the middle, forming a shallow basin. As they stepped closer, the echoes of their boots folded back on themselves. There was no clear reverberation, only an enveloping hush that seemed to swallow the sound before it reached the walls. Keen switched on the recording device. The steel wire spun, capturing a faint hiss. Then, without warning, the microphones began to pulse. Soft at first, a rhythmic flutter, then louder, steady, alive. Vance turned to El-Masri, who stared at the galvanometer needle dancing in sync. "It's measuring pressure change," he said, voice tight. "Every pulse corresponds to displacement. The air itself is moving." They had found a place that breathed. The sound came in cycles 6 seconds apart, each followed by a moment of perfect stillness. The lamps flickered with every exhale. When Vance tried to speak into the recorder, his voice came back doubled, the echo not behind him but beside him, almost whispering along. Keen described it later in her recovered notes. "It feels like the chamber is listening. When we speak, it waits, then answers in kind." The phenomenon grew stronger the longer they stayed. Loose sand trembled. The copper seams along the wall glowed faintly as though charged from within. The compass needles spun lazily, unable to settle. El-Masri knelt by the basin and placed a fragment of magnetite on its surface. It rolled gently in time with the pulse, as if pushed by invisible tides. Vance raised his lantern toward the far wall and froze. There, half hidden beneath a film of dust, was a line of carvings, spirals intersecting circles, repeating endlessly like an equation written by an unseen hand. At their center, one symbol glowed faintly under the lamplight and ankh, but twisted, its arms curling inward like the lungs of a living thing. Keen traced it with her fingertips. "This isn't dynastic," she whispered. "It's older." The radio above ground crackled suddenly. Ward's voice came through, thin and urgent, receiving strong interference like pressure waves. "Are you transmitting?" Vance leaned toward the microphone. "Negative. We're..." Static drowned his words. The entire chamber vibrated, a deep resonance that seemed to rise from beneath their feet. The lamps flickered, flared, then steadied. When silence returned, the air felt heavier, as though the room had just exhaled. Keen turned slowly to the others. "It's aware of us," she said. No one disagreed. The chamber's pulse had steadied by the time they found it a second doorway, or what appeared to be one, set flush into the rock behind the plinth. It was rectangular, 2 meters high, bordered by a copper band that gleamed even in the failing lamplight. No hinges, no seams, no visible handle, just a solid surface of metal fused into the stone, as if the two materials had been born together. Vance approached first, his boots echoing faintly on the smooth floor. "A door," he said quietly, though his voice carried little conviction. It didn't look like a door, it looked like the end of the world. El-Masri ran his light along the edge. Pure copper, perhaps 99%. Impossible craftsmanship. Old Kingdom tools couldn't have cut this. He pressed his palm flat against it. It was cold, colder than any stone around it, and he felt a faint tremor beneath the surface, a vibration too low to hear. "It's alive," he whispered. They tried to pry it with chisels. The first strike rang out like a cathedral bell, the sound rolling through the chamber until the walls seemed to sing back. The second strike bent the chisel. The third made the lanterns flicker and die. Vance ordered a halt. No more. Keen, meanwhile, had set the recorder near the plinth. On playback, the wire sang with overtones, harmonics layered like a choir, yet no one had been speaking. When she slowed the recording to half speed, she noticed something even stranger. It was as though the metal door were breathing with the pyramid itself. At 4:26 p.m, the barometer needle jumped violently, indicating a sudden pressure drop. Then, for a few seconds, everything became silent. Even their own footsteps seemed muted. The next moment, a faint sound rose from behind the copper. 3 knocks. Perfectly spaced. Vance looked toward Keen. "Record that." They waited, listening. Another 3 knocks answered. Slower this time. Then nothing. El-Masri placed the galvanometer against the metal surface. The needle swung wildly to the right magnetic disturbance. He noted strong enough to distort a compass within 2 meters. He scribbled the data, though his handwriting trembled. Above ground, the seismographs registered a short burst of vibration from beneath the plateau. Magnitude 2.3. Localized precisely at the pyramid's base, the signal lasted 6 seconds and stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Inside the chamber, the lights dimmed again. Keen later wrote, "The door did not open, but something passed through nonetheless. What to Sludge? The expedition withdrew to the shaft's midpoint to rest. When they returned, half an hour later, they found the copper surface coated with condensation. Fingerprints their own, perhaps, were now pressed outward, as though from the other side. By nightfall, Vance had ordered the team to retreat to the surface. "We regroup tomorrow," he said. But none of them slept. From the tents above, they swore they could hear a low metallic hum coming from beneath the sand, pulsing in perfect rhythm, 6 seconds on, 6 seconds off. The next morning, when they descended again, the copper door was dry, the fingerprints were gone, and though the instrument still recorded vibration, no one heard another sound from behind the hatch. Not that day. Not ever again. When the rescue party entered the shaft weeks later, they found the chamber undisturbed, at least on the surface. The rope line ended at the basin. The lamps were cold, the plinth bare, and in the corner, near the wall where the copper hatch had been struck, sat 3 wooden crates, half buried in dust. Inside were fragments of paper, torn catalogue sheets from the expedition's inventory. Most of the text had faded, but a few lines remained legible. Copper rods, 3. Magnetite discs, 2. Cloth wrapping non-Egyptian weave. The handwriting was Keen's, neat and exact, followed by a single note in red pencil. To be analysed for an alloy? No artefacts were ever recovered with the crates. The objects listed on those sheets had vanished, leaving only faint impressions in the dust circles and rectangular outlines where weight once pressed. Investigators from the Antiquities Department sealed the items in storage under the label GE34 filed. Decades later, when researchers reopened the files, they found the crates empty. The contents had been quietly transferred elsewhere, destination unknown. The accompanying lab notes, however, tell their own story. Early test results from residue samples revealed traces of nickel, tin, and an unidentified conductive element, one not matching any known copper alloy of the period. Under ultraviolet light, the remaining dust particles glowed faintly blue. One technician wrote, "Residual magnetism detected similar to storage discharge. Material was once electrified. Those reports were never made public. Instead, a sanitized summary appeared in the 1935 Journal of Egyptian Geophysics, citing modern contamination. Yet the dates don't align. The samples had been sealed before the rescue team arrived. A rumor persisted among the workers who helped retrieve the crates that the boxes had been heavier when first carried out. 2 men claimed to feel warmth emanating from inside, though the wood appeared untouched by heat. The next day, one of them, a porter named Hassan Khalil, was dismissed after complaining of nausea and ringing in his ears. His wife later said he woke in the night muttering about machines that breathe. The official inventory lists were filed under missing during transfer. Keen's field diary was never found among them, though her graphite pencil and notebook binding were recovered near the surface shaft. The last entry visible before the pages disintegrated read, "Objects resonate faintly. El-Masri suspects internal current." For years afterward, archaeologists debated whether the expedition had truly discovered advanced metalwork beneath the pyramid or simply misidentified weathered veins of ore. But in 1978, when chemical spectrographs were run on the remaining dust, the results again showed a purity of 99.8%. A level of refinement still difficult to achieve without modern induction smelting. The missing rods, discs, and wrappings remain unaccounted for. In 2009, a curator at the British Museum admitted under anonymity that a sealed package of unknown alloy fragments was kept in the sub-basement collection, labelled only as Unverified Provenance, Egypt 1934. He described it simply: "The metal hums when touched." The existence of the film was almost forgotten, a single reel, mislabelled and misplaced in a British warehouse for more than 3 decades. It resurfaced in 1968, when archivists cataloguing Pathé news footage found a canister marked Giza Survey Operations 1934. Inside, 63 minutes of silent, flickering black and white film. The footage had been stored so long that the nitrate stock had fused in places, brittle as parchment, but when technicians carefully unspooled it, they found something no one expected. The first 20 minutes were mundane. Daylight shots of the base camp, the workers hauling rope, engineers calibrating instruments. Then, at timestamp 0 hours 22 minutes and 15 seconds, the camera tilted toward the pyramid itself. 2 men stand near a gaping hole in the limestone base, the newly opened shaft. Behind them, a figure in uniform adjusts his helmet lamp. Colonel Howard Vance. The descent sequence began at 0 hours 31 minutes. The cinematographer followed as far as the entrance, lowering the camera on a fixed rig. The footage wobbles, grainy and claustrophobic shadows on stone. The rhythmic sway of rope. Flashes of carbide light. At 0 hours 47 minutes and 20 seconds, the soundtrack recorded separately on wax cylinder registered a faint hum that matched the 16 Hz resonance later documented by the rescue teams. Then, at 0 hours 59 minutes and 40 seconds, the image trembles violently. A distortion spreads across the frame like rippling heat. The lantern light elongates, stretching into thin threads before fading entirely. The next few seconds show nothing but black. When the picture returns, Vance is facing the camera, his expression unreadable. The light catches his eyes for an instant wide, reflective. He appears to mouth something, perhaps to the operator, though no sound survives. Behind him, a faint glow rises along the walls, pulsing, organic like the rhythm of breath. At 1 hours 2 minutes and 15 seconds, the camera jerks upward abruptly. The last clear image is of Keen, partially turned, her lamp illuminating a copper surface that seems to curve rather than lie flat. Then static, the grain of film breaking down into a cascade of white sparks. The reel ends suddenly at 1 hours 3 minutes and 2 seconds. When archivists ran chemical analysis on the film's surface, they found traces of magnetite dust, the same black powder documented in the chamber notes. It should have been impossible. The footage was developed in Cairo, hundreds of miles from the site. In 1972, the British Museum quietly transferred the reel to a private facility for long-term preservation. Only a few frames have ever been publicly released, each showing distorted light patterns that some physicists compared to electromagnetic discharge. But the reel contained another anomaly. Between frames 1982 and 1988, barely a quarter of a second of footage appears a single image, the chamber walls glowing faintly as though lit from within. The copper veins shine white-hot. Keen stands motionless, one hand raised, her outline blurred as if vibrating. Behind her, a shape moves, not human. The archivist who examined the film resigned shortly afterward, refusing to speak on record. His only written comment, scrawled in the margin of the report, reads, "It wasn't shadow. It moved against the light. The reel is now sealed in a temperature-controlled vault." Pathé lists it officially as Giza subsurface operations. Damaged footage. Yet those who have viewed it, a handful of technicians, curators, and one surviving descendant of the expedition, say that when the film ends, the hum does not. Even in silence, they insist. You can still hear breathing. When the search began, Cairo held its breath. For 72 hours, soldiers, engineers, and archaeologists swarmed the Giza plateau, their boots leaving shallow prints that the wind erased as quickly as they appeared. Above them, the Great Pyramid stood indifferent, its shadow stretching long and black across the sand. No one dared call it a recovery mission. Officially, it was a containment survey, a phrase that meant nothing and explained less. The shaft had been sealed the night before, after the last radio transmission faded. The copper hatch below, according to Vance's final log entry, had resisted all attempt at movement. The rescue team expected collapse or gas exposure. Instead, they found precision. Every chalk mark along the shaft wall ended neatly at the 36th. Beyond that, the surface had changed texture, smooth and glassy, as though the rock had melted and reformed. The rope line terminated abruptly, its end fused into a solid lump. The lamps recovered at the 30-meter mark were intact, their mantles unburned, fuel remaining inside. No bodies, no tools, no debris, only stillness. By the second day, the temperature above ground had risen sharply, the heat shimmering off the limestone. Inside the shaft, though, the air remained unnaturally cold. When workers lowered thermometers, readings dropped by nearly 10 degrees before stabilizing. At 3:11 p.m., the ground shuddered briefly. Instruments at the Helwan Observatory detected a localized vibration beneath the pyramid. Magnitude 2.3, lasting 6 seconds. No aftershock, no explanation. The tremor came from directly beneath the sealed shaft. The Ministry of Antiquities ordered all activity suspended. Soldiers erected barriers around the pyramid, their rifles glinting in the sunday. Reporters gathered along the ridge, shouting questions that no one answered. That night, as the wind picked up, they heard the distant rattle of metal not from tools, but from somewhere below. In his diary, Lieutenant Farouk Hassan, one of the perimeter guards, wrote, "The air feels charged, as before a storm. At intervals, the ground vibrates softly, as if something below is stirring. On the third morning, the plateau fell silent. Birds that nested in the stone crevices fled. The seismographs flattened into calm lines. Even the radios, which had been alive with static since the incident, went dead. For a few brief hours, there was perfect stillness, no pulse, no hum, no breath. Then, at sunset, a single sound returned. Not from beneath the pyramid, but from within the military tents, a low resonance that made the canvas tremble. Ward, who had remained on site to oversee the equipment, recognized it instantly. 6 seconds on, 6 seconds off. He switched off the receiver. The hum continued. After that night, the site was closed under British-Egyptian joint order. All instruments were confiscated, all reports sealed. Within a week, the area around the shaft was filled with sand and limestone rubble. To the outside world, the story ended there. Cairo's newspapers printed a single statement. Survey operations concluded, no findings of note, but those who stood guard in those final nights spoke of something else. The faint vibration that lingered in the soles of their boots, pulsing even after they walked away. The desert was silent again. Yet in that silence, some swore they could still feel it. The slow, steady rhythm of a breath that had never stopped. Pierre Dupont was not part of the expedition. He was a mapmaker, a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses and the patience of someone accustomed to measuring the world in millimeters. In the spring of 1934, he had been hired by the French Geodetic Mission to update survey grids along the Nile. His tent stood 3 kilometers east of Giza, on a low ridge that offered a clear view of the pyramid line. Each night, Dupont performed a ritual of precision. He would check the alignment of his compass against Polaris, log declination drift, and recalibrate his theodolite before packing his instruments in oiled cloth. For weeks, everything remained ordinary. Then, on the evening of June 12th, the same night, the Vance expedition vanished. The compass needle began to tremble. At first, he assumed local interference. Iron deposits in the sand could cause mild deviation. But when he took a second reading, the needle spun 7 degrees west, paused, then drifted slowly back. He reset the instrument and waited. Minutes later, it happened again. By midnight, the variation had grown to 11 degrees, oscillating rhythmically once every 6 seconds. Dupont noted the interval in his journal, adding a small sketch of concentric circles radiating from the pyramid. He wasn't alone in observing it. 2 Egyptian radio operators stationed near his camp recorded bursts of static at the same intervals, lasting exactly 6 seconds, identical to the frequency described in Ward's surface logs. They, too, reported no audible voices, only the impression of pressure, like the air itself thickening and thinning. On the following evening, Dupont attempted a triangulation. He set up 2 compasses 50 meters apart, both aligned to north. As the pyramid's shadow lengthened across the sand, both needles began their slow, synchronized deviation 11 degrees west, then back. His galvanometer, attached to a copper grounding rod, twitched in perfect rhythm. He marked the readings every minute for an hour. The pattern was flawless, 6-second pulses repeating without variance. "No mechanical source possible," he wrote. "Phenomenon seems to emanate from beneath the plateau." When he reported the data to his superior at the French mission, the response was swift and cold. "Cease observations, destroy records, area under British jurisdiction." Dupont did neither. Instead, he sealed his notebooks in a tin case and mailed them to his sister in Marseille. They arrived 2 months later, unopened. The postmark bore a Cairo date of July 6, 3 days after British forces had sealed off the excavation site. His notes remained forgotten for decades, until rediscovered in 1994 by a French historian studying geomagnetic anomalies. Analysis of the surviving pages confirmed the readings were genuine, consistent with minor electromagnetic field distortions, but none known to persist with such rhythmic regularity. In an interview before his death in 1951, Dupont described the event with the quiet clarity of a scientist who knew he would never be believed. "It was as if the Earth had developed a heartbeat," he said. "The instruments moved as though responding to something alive below." His colleagues dismissed the claim. Yet one line in his final notebook continues to haunt researchers. After the 3rd night, the compass ceased its motion, as though the source had grown still. "But when I placed my ear to the ground, I heard the faintest vibration not through air, but through stone, a deep, slow breath that travelled upward." Dupont's body was found years later near his home in Lyon, his belongings neatly arranged. Among them, police found his original field compass. The needle, though rusted and stiff, still pointed 11 degrees west of true north. And when a technician later tested it for calibration, the compass quivered once precisely every 6 seconds. The tremor came at 2:14 a.m. on June 14, 1934, silent, brief, and invisible to the world beyond Giza. The Helwan Observatory, 30 kilometers to the south, registered it as a localized vibration of magnitude 2.3, small enough to escape public notice, yet sharp enough to set a single ink needle dancing across the paper drum. The trace lasted exactly 6 seconds. It was the only seismic event ever recorded directly beneath the Great Pyramid. At the observatory, Technician Farid Kamel was the first to notice the spike. He marked the graph, cross-checked against his secondary instrument, and recalibrated. The tremor had no preceding wave, no echo. It had begun and ended instantaneously, as though the Earth had drawn a single breath and held it. Kamel filed the reading under local anomaly. 2 days later, military officers arrived to collect the chart. He never saw it again. In Cairo, the disturbance passed unnoticed. But at Giza, witnesses felt the Earth shift. Lieutenant Hassan, still stationed near the sealed shaft, reported that his lantern shivered though the air was still. Others claimed to hear a dull, metallic tone echoing up from beneath the sand, followed by a moment of heavy silence. The sound, they said, seemed to pulse inward rather than outward, as though something beneath the pyramid had contracted. The next morning, a team of engineers conducted a structural assessment. They found no evidence of subsidence or fracture. The limestone blocks were stable. The copper seams embedded along the pyramid's northern base showed faint discoloration, as if lightly scorched. Instruments left near the site registered residual magnetism far above baseline. A British officer overseeing the survey made a brief note in his log. Vibration coincided precisely with 8-minute interference cycle recorded on camp radio. He was ordered to remove the line before submitting the official report. The tremor, small as it was, set off a chain of responses beneath the bureaucracy. Within 24 hours, telegrams were sent to the British Museum, the Geological Society in London, and the Egyptian Ministry of Public Works. Most went unanswered. One, however, returned from London with a single cryptic message: "Suspend all excavation. Magnetic resonance risk unconfirmed." In later years, seismologists re-examining the observatory's archives confirmed that no other tremors of similar depth or frequency were recorded in the region, not before and not since. The 2.3 magnitude pulse remains a singular event, isolated to the coordinates of the pyramid's base. Geophysicist Dr. Leila Morcos, who studied the data in 2007, offered a theory. The readings suggest a compression pulse, not tectonic. It's as if a chamber suddenly expelled air under immense pressure, a perfect exhalation. But pressure from what? And why only once? Others speculated that the tremor was not geological at all, but electromagnetic, an induced vibration in the surrounding rock. When strong magnetic fields interact with conductive materials like copper or magnetite, they can create oscillations perceptible as microseismic waves. The pyramid, with its veins of conductive stone, might have acted like a natural resonator. Still, the precision of the timing unsettled researchers. The tremor lasted exactly 6 seconds, the same duration as the radio pulses and the breathing intervals recorded below ground. Coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely. In 1935, when Vance's disappearance became a closed case, the British Geological Survey quietly published a short paper on localized magnetic events in sedimentary rock. The data fit the pyramid's coordinates perfectly. Though the location was never named, it ended with one understated line: "Subject exhibits behavior consistent with a cyclical field release of unknown origin." And yet, no one could answer the question that troubled both engineers and historians alike. If the pyramid had exhaled that night, what had it been holding in? The official reports say no one was recovered, but Cairo remembers differently. In the grey light before dawn on June 15th, a line of trucks rolled quietly across the Giza plateau, their headlamps shrouded, their engines muffled. Witnesses from the nearby workers' village of Nazlet El Samman recalled soldiers forming a perimeter around the excavation site, while officers in British uniforms supervised the loading of long, narrow crates onto the vehicles. No one was allowed near, not even the Egyptian guards assigned to the site. What the trucks carried remains undocumented, but a handful of surviving field notes written by Lieutenant Farouk Hassan hint at what he saw. At approximately 5:22, wooden caskets were lifted from the shaft area. Surface sand was disturbed but not collapsed. The crates emitted low warmth despite the cold air. The lieutenant's journal was confiscated a week later. Only a copy of that page survives, held today in a private collection in Alexandria. Later that morning, a British field medic named Andrew Harcourt recorded an unusual entry in his unit log. Provided sealed containers to recovery team, contents to remain unexamined. Medical unit advised to remain on standby. No further explanation followed. Harcourt's grandson would later testify that his grandfather spoke often of a job in Giza that haunted him for life. According to rumours whispered through Cairo's antiquities circles, 2 bodies were indeed brought to the surface but not intact. Their forms, reportedly wrapped in cloth soaked with mineral residue, were discoloured, as if burned from within. Some claimed the remains glowed faintly under lamplight before fading. None of these descriptions appear in the official accounts. One unverified report from a translator at the Ministry of Antiquities describes a moment of confusion inside the recovery tent. One demanded that the bodies be returned underground. The other refused, saying, "We've already awakened it once. We will not again." By noon, the trucks had vanished toward Cairo. That evening, a military convoy departed from Abbasia barracks, heading toward the railway yard at Imbaba. A small shipment marked "Scientific Materials, Fragile" was logged for transport to Alexandria. No customs entry lists its contents. The British Embassy issued a brief press note the next day. Survey concluded. All personnel accounted for. It was a lie so carefully written that few questioned it, yet within the camp, unease lingered. The Egyptian labourers refused to return to the shaft, claiming they heard low knocking from beneath the sealed entrance each night. Even when the area was filled with sand, the sound persisted soft, rhythmic, faintly metallic. In 1936, a telegram was sent from Cairo to the Foreign Office in London. Its author, whose name was redacted in declassification, wrote, "Recovered items stable but still emitting field response. Recommend containment at sea or underground. No replies recorded." Decades later, an aging dock worker in Alexandria claimed that he remembered loading 2 narrow boxes, copper-coloured, onto a British freighter bound for Malta in July 1934. He said the boxes were escorted by 3 men in plain suits who refused to speak Arabic and kept handheld instruments that clicked when held near the cargo. They never non does not die. The freighter HMS Mercia never reached Malta. It sank off the Libyan coast during a sudden electrical storm. No survivors were found. When divers explored the wreck in the 1960 seconds, they reported an area of magnetic interference so intense that compasses failed and navigation equipment froze. The cause was never identified. Whether those caskets contained the remains of the expedition or something they carried out of the chamber, no one knows. But in Cairo, there is an old saying repeated by the museum guards who work the night shift. The pyramid does not lose what it takes, it only lends it back for a while. The journal surfaced by accident. In the spring of 1935, a merchant in Cairo's Khan el-Khalili Bazaar bought a bundle of old papers from a British officer's widow. Inside, wrapped in linen and dust, was a small water-stained notebook bound in red leather. The first pages were blank. Then, in faint pencil strokes, appeared the name Margaret Keane. Scholars would later call it the most controversial artifact in modern Egyptology. The journal's authenticity was verified through handwriting analysis. Comparing it to Keane's earlier field notes from the British Museum, the graphite was consistent with the 1930 seconds, and traces of magnetite dust clung to the binding threads. Its contents were incomplete, half the pages torn, others fused together, but what remained painted a portrait of a mind both brilliant and terrified. The entries began days before the descent. Vance grows impatient. He says we are closer than anyone has ever been to the first breath of the earth. The restrooms reg of the en-raj. Then, entries from inside the shaft. The air moves in patterns. It pulls toward the walls. The copper is warm now. We hear tones below speech. The sound is not wind, it is breathing. One page was entirely smudged except for a single phrase written 3 times. We have entered its lung. Another described the moment before contact with the copper hatch. It hummed beneath our hands. The light faltered. I saw shapes, reflections, maybe moving behind the metal, like shadows cast by a fire that wasn't there. The journal abruptly skips 2 pages, then continues with erratic handwriting. Amin says the pressure is equalized, but I feel heavier. My bones ache when it exhales. There is no up or down anymore, only rhythm. Later entries grow disjointed, almost poetic. We are being remembered. The air learns our names. The sound follows me even when I close my ears. Historians debate whether these were the last words she wrote underground, or notes transcribed afterward during early recovery efforts if such recovery ever occurred. The journal vanishes from record after 1936, when a curator from the Egyptian Museum borrowed it. For examination, it reappeared briefly in 1957, when an article in Le Monde referenced a lost notebook of the Giza woman, before being withdrawn under pressure from British diplomats. When the journal was examined again in 2004 by forensic archivists, they discovered something extraordinary. When scanned using magneto-optical imaging, each page revealed repeating interference lines, 6-second pulses, embedded like a fingerprint. It was as if the very air that surrounded her had impressed its rhythm into the paper. One final fragment remained, barely legible, written sideways across the margin. If anyone reads this, do not breathe near the door. It breathes back. Today, the notebook rests in a sealed drawer in the Cairo Museum's restricted archive. Its catalogue number, 7KH34, is unlisted in public databases. Once a year, during routine inventory, curators note an anomaly. The temperature inside its case drops by 2 degrees for several hours. The instruments call it coincidence, but one archivist, interviewed anonymously in 2018, said quietly, "When you touch the glass, you can feel it faintly, the pulse. Like the page is still alive." For decades, the story of the 1934 expedition remained a myth. Whispered among archaeologists, a cautionary tale buried under sand and bureaucracy. Then, in 1972, a group of acoustic engineers at Cairo University rediscovered the old recordings labelled GZ Field Audio 1934 Unknown Origin. The reels were brittle, their oxide coating flaking away, but within the static was a pulse, a deep, sustained vibration that repeated every 6 seconds. It was Professor Nabil Shukri, a physicist specializing in infrasound, who first proposed an experiment. He believed that whatever had caused the Giza hum might still be reproducible. Using high-powered transducers, he replicated the exact frequency recorded in the 1934 field notes. 16.3 Hz, below the range of human hearing but powerful enough to resonate through solid structures. The test began in a sealed acoustic chamber on campus. 6 volunteers entered, 3 students, 2 technicians, and Shukri himself. The transducers emitted a low, invisible vibration. At first, the group felt only a faint pressure in their ears, like descending in an airplane. But after 5 minutes, the atmosphere changed. The walls began to tremble softly, though no air moved. One student reported dizziness. Another began to cry without knowing why. At the 7-minute mark, the oscillation intensified. The participants described feeling watched and hearing breath where there was none. When the lights flickered, Shukri halted the test. Instruments showed no mechanical fault. The resonance had somehow built upon itself, producing a harmonic frequency not programmed into the generator. The results unsettled him. If such a tone could persist underground, The pressure could induce hallucinations, panic, or loss of equilibrium, he said. But what if the tone was not produced by machinery at all? What if it was structural, a natural amplifier built into the stone? Over the next weeks, Shukri's team tested the Great Pyramid itself. Using portable sonic probes, they transmitted low-frequency pulses along the northern base. The instruments recorded faint echoes, not random, but patterned. Every reflection returned precisely 6 seconds apart. The readings matched those from 1934. The Ministry of Antiquities halted the experiments after local residents complained of vibrating floors and voices in the sand. The data was sealed, but not before Shukri shared a copy with an American acoustician named James Whittaker, who later recreated the phenomenon in a Nevada research facility. Whittaker's report, published quietly in 1983, documented a disturbing side effect. Instruments left in the test chamber for more than 15 minutes began to show spontaneous electrical charge. Even with power removed, coils and capacitors stored voltage as though drawing energy from the vibration itself. Whittaker wrote, 16 Hz appears to generate a standing field when reflected within closed geometries of certain ratios. The Giza structure, built on these dimensions, may be functioning as a resonant cavity. That statement reignited decades of speculation. Was the Great Pyramid engineered not merely as a tomb, but as an acoustic device? Yet what haunted researchers most was not the theory, but the data. In 1991, when the recordings were digitized for preservation, technicians noticed something buried deep in the noise, a second frequency layered beneath the primary tone. It was faint, fluctuating, almost human in cadence. When accelerated 200 times to reach audible range, it resembled breath, a slow inhale and exhale, 6 seconds apart. The technicians dismissed it as mechanical echo. But one of them, an audio restoration specialist named Amal Farouk, disagreed. The sound wasn't reverberation, she said. It was responsive. Every time we paused playback, it paused too. Her colleagues laughed. She stopped working nights soon after. The project was shelved. The reels returned to storage. But Shukri's final note before retiring remains etched on the back of his lab door, scratched into the paint. 6 seconds on, 6 seconds off. We have not silenced it, we've only learned to listen. The Latwij Sam Notwan Dimzayand. By 1987, ground-penetrating radar had advanced far beyond what the 1,930 seconds engineers could have imagined. A Japanese-Egyptian research team led by Professor Hiroshi Nagano and Dr. Lila Morkos began a non-invasive survey of the Giza Plateau using newly developed microwave radar. The aim was purely scientific, to locate hidden voids within the limestone foundation. What they found would reopen a mystery the world thought buried. The initial scans of the Great Pyramid's base returned as expected solid stone, fractured only by known tunnels. But when the team mapped the area directly beneath the king's chamber, an anomaly appeared. A rectangular void, 30 meters long and nearly 6 meters high, perfectly aligned with the central axis. At first, they suspected instrument drift. They recalibrated, adjusted for mineral interference, and ran a second scan. The same cavity appeared consistent depth, identical orientation. Its upper boundary matched precisely the location where the 1,934 seismic readings had indicated a hollow echo. They named it provisionally Chamber D9, later known among researchers as the Hall of Echoes. Curiosity quickly outpaced caution. Using magnetotomography, the team measured variations in the subsurface field. The results were strange. Every reading exhibited a rhythmic oscillation, repeating every 6 seconds. Dr. Morkos compared the data to heartbeat intervals and noted the coincidence uneasily in her report. In late October, the Japanese government provided funding for a deeper scan using Muon tomography. a technique measuring cosmic ray particles passing through stone. After a month of data collection, the computers revealed a high-density image and the cavity's internal structure faintly visible. Inside the void, near the center, lay a cluster of shapes unlike natural fractures, perfect hemispherical impressions arranged in a ring. Around them, traces of metallic signature, possibly copper. Nagano presented the findings to the Egyptian Antiquities Council in December 1987. His recommendation was cautious but clear. The void may be artificial, likely predating known construction phases. We advise careful monitoring for vibration. 3 nights later, at 2:14 a.m., the seismic sensors around the pyramid registered a brief microtremor lasting 6 seconds. The same pattern once recorded in 1934. Equipment in Nagano's trailer malfunctioned, compasses spinning, radio static flooding the air. The next morning, when technicians checked the sensors, one had fused entirely, its casing warped as though heated from within. Authorities ordered the research suspended for safety reasons. The radar data was archived, but copies circulated quietly through academic channels. In 1990, an engineer at Kyoto University enhanced the raw scan and discovered faint gradients within the cavity's floor, identical to ripples formed by low-frequency vibration. He nicknamed them acoustic fingerprints. When overlaid with the geometry of the pyramid, something uncanny emerged. The cavity's angle of descent matched the alignment of Orion's belt during the winter solstice of 1934, exactly the date the Vance expedition disappeared. The coincidence unsettled even the skeptics. Dr. Morcos, now head of Cairo's Seismic Institute, later said, "We are measuring something that reacts to time itself as though the structure remembers specific nights. Tourists visiting Giza today walk unknowingly above that void." Muon imaging in 2023 confirmed its continued existence, silent, undisturbed, yet subtly active. Instruments still register minute air pressure fluctuations inside the pyramid's core, pulsing every 6 seconds. Scientists call it an artifact of temperature change. Locals still call it what they always have, nafas al-hajar, the breath of the stone. For centuries, scholars dismissed Herodotus's mention of the buried halls of the priests as poetic embellishment. In histories, written around 440 BCE, the Greek chronicler described vast chambers beneath the Great Pyramid where machines of the sky were once guarded by temple keepers who spoke to the air as to a living god. Historians attributed it to myth, a traveller's exaggeration. Yet the rediscovery of the 1934 seismic data gave those ancient lines new weight, especially when archaeologists found the fragment that would become known as the Lost Map of Herodotus. The story begins in 1976, inside the archives of the University of Bologna. A forgotten collection of papyrus facsimiles acquired from a Venetian dealer in 1824 was being digitized. Among them lay a parchment annotated in Greek, accompanied by Coptic marginalia. It showed the Giza plateau drawn in geometric proportion, not artistic sketch, precise coordinates, cardinal alignments, and a faint spiral symbol beneath the northern base of the Great Pyramid. When radiocarbon tests dated the parchment's fibers to roughly the 3rd century BCE, scholars realized it was a much later copy of a lost original, possibly Herodotus's own reference notes or those of a student. A marginal note read, "Beneath the stone of Ra's breath, the hidden way descends to the chamber of air." The term stone of Ra's breath was instantly recognizable. Ancient priests often described limestone as the stone that breathes, because it exhaled moisture and air when heated by the Sunday. Yet the phrase, "the hidden way descends to the chamber of air," mirrored almost word for word the terminology found in Keene's journal centuries later. Professor Lydia Curie, who led the translation, noticed something stranger still. A series of small ink marks along the pyramid's northern face, positioned in ratios matching modern coordinates. When converted using current geospatial mapping, the spiral symbol aligned within 300 meters of the shaft uncovered by Vance's team in 1934. Coincidence or memory carried through millennia. When Curie published her findings in Annals of Classical Geography, the reaction was swift and divided. Traditional Egyptologists dismissed the map as symbolic. The geometry, they argued, was metaphor for spiritual descent. But a handful of physicists saw something else. An early attempt to diagram sound. The spiral on the map, when analysed under image enhancement, appeared to trace a wave pattern. The distances between each loop followed a mathematical ratio of 3, 4, 5, identical to the harmonic progression of the 16 Hz resonance documented beneath the pyramid. In 1980, an acoustic engineer from Paris named André Louvel proposed that the spiral represented not geography but vibration, an early depiction of frequency as form. It may describe a standing wave, he said. If so, it is the oldest known technical diagram on Earth. The Ministry of Culture in Egypt quickly requested the original facsimile for study. It arrived in Cairo in 1981 and has not been seen publicly since. Researchers who viewed it before its removal recall faint brown streaks along the edges, as though singed by heat. Unpublished notes by Corey's assistant record her final comments before the map disappeared. The spiral does not end. It continues beyond the page, folding back upon itself, like a breath returning to its source. Today, a reproduction hangs quietly in the Cairo University archives. Its annotations are clear: latitude, longitude, and an inscription in faded Greek. Where the air speaks, the gods listen. To the casual eye, it is a curiosity. To those who have heard the hum of the pyramid, it is a map not of space but of sound. And if Herodotus truly saw those halls, then the mystery of the 1934 expedition is not modern at all. It is a conversation begun thousands of years ago, between stone and air, still whispering beneath the desert. By the early 21st century, technology had caught up to legend. In 2023, a Japanese team from Nagoya University installed muon detectors within the Queen's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, sensitive instruments designed to read the invisible rain of cosmic particles that pass through stone. Over time, these particles build a picture of density, where rock is solid and where it is hollow. The results stunned even the skeptics. After 6 months of exposure, the muon data revealed a large void directly above the Grand Gallery. A space 30 meters long, 6 high, and perfectly aligned with the pyramid's center. Scientists called it the Great Void. But among those who remembered the 1,934 seismic notes, the measurements were hauntingly familiar. The angle of descent beneath the King's Chamber matched precisely with the route Colonel Vance's team had followed. Nagoya physicist Kunihiro Morishima announced cautiously, "We cannot call it a chamber, but it is not natural. It was designed." His statement reignited global fascination. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities confirmed the finding, yet banned any drilling or exploration. "The pyramid is to remain undisturbed," said Minister Khaled Al-Anani, but privately, technicians continued running data overnight. One anomaly kept returning. Every few hours, the detectors recorded brief surges, faint increases in particle flux, lasting 6 seconds. Statistically insignificant perhaps, but unnervingly consistent. When converted to audio spectrum data, the pattern mirrored the frequency recorded by both the 1934 radio logs and Professor Shukri's infrasound experiments half a century later. 6 seconds on, 6 seconds off. The pyramid, it seemed, still pulsed. A confidential appendix, later leaked to the Japanese press, described another observation. The instruments themselves began to drift out of calibration after prolonged exposure. Electronic components developed residual charge, as if subtly magnetized. When stored off-site, the interference ceased. "There is energy here," but not in the conventional sense. In February 2024, the team installed additional sensors to triangulate the anomaly. What they discovered was subtle but unmistakable, a faint vertical corridor leading downward from the void toward the pyramid's northern base. Its trajectory intersected exactly with the coordinates of the sealed 1934 shaft. The alignment was too perfect to ignore. Yet the ministry again denied requests to excavate. One internal memo, later leaked to Asahi Shimbun, summarized their reasoning. Unstable electromagnetic resonance continues at periodic intervals. Site declared geologically sensitive. Local workers began complaining of headaches, vertigo, and what they described as breathing walls. An engineer from the Japanese team, interviewed anonymously, claimed that even after leaving the site, he could still feel a subtle rhythm inside his bones. Medical tests showed nothing. The data was published in Nature later that year, sanitized of its strangeness. The void was labeled an unknown architectural cavity. But the raw measurements, quietly uploaded to a public database, contained an overlooked detail. The muon density fluctuated slightly in a waveform, rising and falling every 6 seconds, like a pulse. When independent analysts converted those density changes into an acoustic model, the resulting frequency matched the one Vance's team recorded 90 years earlier. What the muons had captured, perhaps unintentionally, was the same breath that had haunted every generation since 1934, proof that the pyramid had not fallen silent. It was still breathing, and somewhere beneath that living stone, between two chambers divided by 9 decades of history, the rhythm continued steady, patient, unchanged, a voice through time, repeating a message no one yet understands. In the dim archives of the British Museum, among the endless drawers of correspondence from the Empire's farthest reaches, lies a single typewritten page that has never appeared in any public catalogue. The letter bears the date October 19th, 1934, and the letterhead of the British Museum, Department of Egyptian and Assyrian Antiquities. Its author, Dr. Harold Whitcomb, then Curator of Field Operations, addressed it to the Foreign Office, London, Confidential Section. The text, brittle with age and yellowed by time, is brief but chillingly precise. All Giza artifacts secured. Recommend indefinite suspension of further excavation due to unusual magnetic interference at site. Materials exhibit residual charge inconsistent with atmospheric origin. Chamber appears to amplify static to measurable degree. Containment protocols advised. Request consultation with Ministry of Defense, Signals Division. The paragraph ends abruptly, without signature, only Whitcomb's typed initials, H.W. For years, the document was dismissed as misfiled correspondence, perhaps an administrative note, misinterpreting technical jargon, but a marginal annotation written in blue pencil decades later, almost certainly by another curator, raises new questions. It reads simply, Note correlation with GE-34 recovery crates. Cairo. Maintain storage off-site until readings stabilize. That annotation would lead researchers to one of the strangest chapters in the museum's history. The quiet establishment of the subterranean room, a sealed vault below the Egyptian wing used to store materials of uncertain chemical or electrical nature. Its existence wasn't publicly disclosed until the 1970 seconds, when a former technician admitted to monitoring humming crates during night shifts. The earliest inventory log from that vault, declassified only in 2009, lists 6 entries, dated 1934-35. 2 are marked simply Stone Sample, Giza, Fused, Limestone. 3 others read Copper Fragment, Unknown Origin. And 1, crossed out in red pencil, is labelled Organic Remains Unstable. Next to that entry, a single note appears. Do not open in humid conditions. No further information exists. For decades, the vault remained sealed, visited only by a small team of conservators tasked with recording temperature and magnetic flux. Yet the records show a recurring anomaly. Every year, between June 12th and 15th, the anniversary of the expedition's disappearance, the readings spiked. Instruments placed near the copper fragments registered rhythmic voltage fluctuations, 6 seconds on, 6 seconds off. Whitcomb's letter is the first evidence that British authorities recognised the phenomenon as electromagnetic rather than purely mythic. One memo from the Ministry of Defence dated 1935 refers to field resonance consistent with early radio oscillation, not man-made. In modern language, it described an object behaving as both receiver and transmitter, converting environmental energy into patterned signal. In 1961, the vault was quietly relocated during renovations. Crates labelled GE-34 were transported to a military research facility in Wiltshire, known for radar experimentation. None were ever returned. The museum's official statement called the move a temporary conservation measure. When the British government partially declassified defence documents in 2009, journalists discovered references to a resonant archaeological specimen studied under Project Argo. The object's behaviour reportedly mirrored that of materials retrieved from Giza. Residual charge, temperature fluctuation, spontaneous oscillation. The letter, now kept in a glass sleeve, remains the only surviving paper trail connecting the museum to the disappearance. On its reverse side is an indentation, likely made by the typewriter carriage striking too hard a faint outline of words that no longer exist. Forensic imaging has revealed fragments of a final line Whitcomb never typed cleanly. Further exposure may awaken secondary response. Today, the document is filed under private correspondence, restricted access. Only senior curators may view it, those who have described a faint metallic scent near the paper ozone, like the air before a storm. Each June, when the museum's climate control system hums in the quiet night, the sensors in that archive still record a minute oscillation of electromagnetic field strength repeating precisely every 6 seconds. It seems that even buried in bureaucracy, the pyramid's breath continues to exhale through history. Underneath Cairo's Museum of Antiquities, below the public halls where tourists admire mummies and gold masks, lies a network of sealed basements known only to archivists and military liaisons. One of them, officially designated Vault Room 7C, was sealed in August 1934 under the joint supervision of Egyptian and British officials. The reason given: containment of field material from Giza excavation GE-34. For decades, it was a rumour, a whisper passed between curators and electricians who serviced the museum's lower levels. Then, in 1998, a team of contractors renovating the subfloor discovered an old steel door, welded shut and bearing faded stenciled letters, "Caution, electric field storage." Inside, they found 4 wooden crates, untouched since the 1,930 seconds, labelled GE-34 FILD equipment. The contents were as strange as the warnings. In the first crate lay rusted oxygen tanks stamped with British military insignia, their valves fused shut as if melted. The second contained fragments of a theodolite, glass lenses clouded and cracked by heat. The third held chunks of blackened stone that emitted faint radiation, not enough to be dangerous, but measurable. The fourth, most mysterious of all, contained strips of copper mesh folded like fabric. Every object inside showed signs of exposure to intense energy. The copper strips bore parallel burn marks, as though pulsed by alternating current. The stone fragments, when analysed at the National Research Centre, displayed microscopic vitrification, mineral layers, melted at temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius, then rapidly cooled. No known equipment of the 1,930 seconds could have achieved such heat beneath solid limestone. Each crate carried a sealed envelope of documentation. Inside were faded field labels, recovered from subsurface chamber northern shaft. One note bore a signature that matched Dr. Amin el-Masri's handwriting. The words were smudged but readable. Do not expose to open air. Samples retain field. When news of the discovery reached the Ministry of Antiquities, officials quickly sealed Vault 7C again. Only a handful of scientists were allowed to study the materials. Among them was physicist Dr. Samir Halim, who later gave an interview for a BBC documentary that never aired. His testimony, however, was transcribed. We measured a persistent magnetic resonance emanating from the copper. Even after decades in isolation, it vibrated faintly at 16.3 Hz, identical to the pyramid readings. When we touched it with insulated gloves, it felt warm, alive. The radiation from the stone was equally peculiar. Unlike isotopic decay, it fluctuated cyclically. Instruments showed a 6-second rhythm, identical to the electromagnetic pulse recorded in 1934 and again during the 2023 Muon tests. Halim suggested that the stone and metal were coupled two halves of a resonant system that continued to exchange energy even after separation. Within weeks, all testing was halted. The ministry declared the samples national security materials and transferred them to an undisclosed location, rumoured to be a subterranean wing beneath the Egyptian Geological Survey. Vault 7C was resealed and the contractors sworn to silence. In 2011, amid the upheaval of the Arab Spring, the museum briefly lost power for 48 hours. When electricity returned, guards reported a humming from below, deep, steady, rhythmic. Radiation sensors in the building's basement triggered alarms for nearly 6 minutes before falling silent. Officials blamed faulty wiring. Since then, the vault remained sealed behind reinforced concrete, but maintenance workers claim that once a year, in mid-June, the air in the corridor outside cools suddenly, as if exhaled upon from the other side. A modern label now adorns the welded door, archive closed, structural risk. Yet those who know its history call it something else entirely. The heart of the pyramid, one curator whispered, still beats below Cairo. When the analysis began in 2003, the scientists thought they were studying nothing more than mineral debris. The samples labelled GE34 lithic fragment, Giza 1934, had been rediscovered in a neglected wooden drawer inside Cairo University's geology department. They were roughly fist-sized pieces of limestone, grey-white streaked with greenish veins of copper, each fragment catalogued as non-remarkable. But the moment Dr. Nadia Fahmy placed one fragment near a magnetic balance, the needle twitched. Then, without any external current, the sample drew a metal clip across the table. At first she laughed, assuming residual contamination. Yet repeated cleaning did nothing to reduce the attraction. The fragment possessed a ferromagnetic field 100 times stronger than normal limestone. It behaved as though the stone itself remembered magnetism. Over the following weeks, Fahmy's team ran comprehensive tests. X-ray diffraction showed crystalline deformation, consistent with shock metamorphism minerals, heated rapidly beyond 1000 degrees Celsius and cooled in microseconds. This kind of vitrification occurs naturally only at meteorite impact sites. But isotopic analysis revealed no iridium, no extraterrestrial element. Whatever melted the rock came from within the Earth, not from above. Then came the resonance test. Using a laser vibrometer, the team measured micro-oscillations inside the fragment. The stone vibrated faintly at 16.3 Hz, the same frequency documented in the 1934 expedition logs. The amplitude rose and fell every 6 seconds. The finding unsettled the university's administrators. "Rock should not hum," one professor remarked. And yet it does. When a magnetic imaging array was placed around the specimen, the field lines formed a perfect spiral. Not chaotic, but ordered an inward curling vortex, centered on a microscopic inclusion of copper sulfide. Under magnification, the inclusion resembled a thin filament running through the limestone like a nerve. Fahmy hypothesized that lightning might have struck the pyramid repeatedly over millennia, magnetizing the copper veins. But her colleague, physicist Mahmoud Ragab, disagreed. He believed the field was self-sustaining. "It doesn't fade," he said. "It breathes." To test his claim, the team sealed the fragment in a Faraday cage to block external fields. After 24 hours, sensors inside still detected the same oscillation, 6-second cycles, constant. Word of the discovery spread quietly among Egypt's scientific community. One evening, a senior official from the Ministry of Antiquities arrived unannounced. He listened, expressionless, as Fahmy explained the readings. Then he asked a single question. "When did you collect these?" She showed him the label, GE34. The next morning, the samples were gone. Security cameras recorded nothing. Only the empty drawer remained, the air faintly metallic, the instruments on the table still quivering. Months later, a customs officer at Alexandria port intercepted an unmarked crate bound for London. Both emitted low magnetic pulses detectable even through packaging. British authorities requested their release, citing museum repatriation. The cylinders disappeared into diplomatic transport. Fahmy resigned soon afterward, haunted by the experiment's final dataset. The last 24-hour log archived on her personal drive shows a curious detail. The vibration pattern shifted slightly just before removal. For 1 full minute, the 6-second cycle shortened to 5, then lengthened again to 6, as though responding to proximity. Years later, when asked whether she regretted losing the samples, she said only, "No. I think they were trying to return to one another." In 2019, technicians servicing MRI equipment at Cairo University reported brief magnetic surges during calibration. Rhythmic, steady, faintly audible as a hum. The control room clock showed the first spike precisely at 7:42, the anniversary of the last transmission. Among the few surviving artifacts from the Vance expedition, none has provoked more debate than the torn sketchbook attributed to Margaret Keane. It was rediscovered in 1954, decades after the disappearance, during a recataloguing of British Museum storage crates shipped home from Cairo. The pages were brittle, the ink blurred, yet the drawings were unmistakable, a linguist's precise hand, mapping symbols as if translating something never meant for human eyes. The first sketches are familiar. Hieroglyphic notations of the Ankh, the Jed, and the Waz, ancient Egyptian emblems of life, stability, and power. But on the 4th page, the familiar symbols begin to warp. The Ankh's arms curl inward, forming a double spiral. Beneath it, she wrote in pencil, "Variant, encountered not dynastic." In a margin note beside it, pattern resembles airflow diagram, not writing. The deeper into the book one reads, the stranger the imagery becomes. Spirals multiply, connecting into waveforms, interlocking with geometric grids. Some sketches appear almost mathematical, accompanied by numerical ratios that match the harmonic frequencies of sound. At the bottom of one page, Keane scribbled, "If this is language, it is spoken by pressure, not by voice." Modern linguists who examined the notebook found correlations between her spiral motifs and early acoustic models, standing wave patterns formed by vibrating sand on a metal plate. The implication is extraordinary, that Keane had begun to interpret the chamber's pulse as a kind of proto-script, a physical manifestation of communication through resonance. Forensic dating confirmed the ink contained magnetite particles, likely from the same dust coating the copper seams below the pyramid. When exposed to ultraviolet light, faint tracings appeared between her pen lines, interference bands invisible under normal lighting, oscillating in 6-second intervals. It was as if the air around her sketchbook had recorded the pulse, One unfinished page shows a large circular glyph divided by a horizontal line. Beneath it, she wrote, "The upper breath and the lower breath, as above, so below." Scholars later noted that the phrase mirrors ancient Hermetic texts describing the balance between the earthly and celestial. Yet Keene had no known interest in mysticism. She was a philologist, trained to document, not to interpret. A final sequence of sketches shows 3 concentric rings enclosing a central dot, with annotations in rapid, cramped handwriting. Central resonance equal to 111 Hz. Standing wave corresponds to human chest cavity. 111 Hz is a real acoustic frequency, known to trigger a meditative state in the human brain. Monks and chanters have used it for centuries. How could Keene have known this in 1934? The last page is smeared with graphite and blood. Across it, she scrawled a single sentence. It spoke in breath, not sound, and it remembered me. The book was classified until 1992, when curator Dr. Helen Grant examined it for a BBC documentary on lost explorers. After 20 minutes in the viewing room, she reportedly stepped outside, pale and silent. Her written statement later reads, "When the chamber tone recording from 1934 was played near the sketchbook, the graphite lines vibrated faintly. The spiral lifted a trace of dust into the air." I have no further comment. The notebook remains sealed in the museum's restricted archive, its reproduction banned by both the British Museum and the Egyptian Council of Antiquities. But one image circulates quietly online, a scan of the double spiral Ankh. When analysed with audio spectrograph software, it produces a waveform identical to a breath. Inhale 6 seconds, exhale 6 seconds. And those who have viewed the image long enough claim they can feel it, a pressure in the chest, faint and rhythmic, as if the drawing itself still remembers how to breathe. For years after the 1934 expedition disappeared, Cairo's officials treated the matter as closed. The shaft had been filled, the report sealed, and the desert reclaimed its silence. Then, in 1941, a man appeared at the doors of the Egyptian hospital in Old Cairo, claiming to be one of the original diggers from the Vance expedition. His name was Said Ibrahim, a porter from Saqqara whose employment records indeed placed him among the crew listed in the expedition manifest. The problem was simple. Said was presumed dead. The doctors who examined him described a man aged far beyond his years. His hair had turned completely white, his skin pale and dry, as if he had been drained of sunlight. He could barely speak at first, but within days, as strength returned, he began to tell fragments of a story that confounded everyone who heard it. He said he remembered descending into the shaft, the copper walls glowing faintly, the air colder than ice. He recalled the sound, a low, steady rhythm like wind moving through a hollow reed, and then nothing. "The light folded," he murmured to the physician taking notes. "We fell through air that breathed us instead." His speech was fractured, switching between Arabic and an older dialect from Upper Egypt that few understood. When shown a photograph of Colonel Vance, he nodded weakly. He was speaking when the sound came. Then the stone began to move like water. The attending doctor, not knowing what to make of the story, assumed head trauma or amnesia. Yet Said's medical scans revealed no evidence of brain injury. His pulse, however, was irregular. 6 beats. Pause. 6 beats again, as though his heart had learned another rhythm. News of his reappearance spread quietly. 2 men claiming to be from the ministry visited the hospital, questioned him for hours, and left without signing discharge papers. The next morning, his room was empty. The nurses assumed he had wandered off, but his personal items, his shoes, his food, the blanket wrapped around him were still there. A note written in shaky Arabic was found beneath his pillow. It said only, "The air remembers. Do not open the door again." In 1958, a journalist named Omar Ghali published a short article in an Egyptian weekly magazine recounting the incident. He claimed that Said had been seen again years later near the Giza plateau, standing motionless at the base of the pyramid at dawn. Witnesses said he looked older than any man they had ever seen, and that he whispered softly toward the sand, as though speaking to someone beneath it. When approached, he smiled faintly and walked into the desert until the haze swallowed him. He was never seen again. Decades later, in 1982, a team of researchers digitizing old hospital archives discovered a forgotten X-ray plate labeled with his name. The image showed something impossible: metallic filaments running along the bones of his forearm, thin and evenly spaced like veins of copper. The technicians dismissed it as a processing error, but one radiologist noted that the patterns pulsed faintly under exposure, as though magnetized. By then, the story of the man who returned had faded into legend. Some said he had never existed. Others whispered he was buried secretly by those who feared what he had seen. But even today, among the workers who live near Giza, there is talk of an old man who walks the dunes during the hottest nights of June. They say he carries no light, yet his shadow glows faintly blue. They call him the Listener, the one who came back when the others did not. Those who claim to have met him all say the same thing. He never speaks first, and he never looks at you directly. He just listens to the wind, counting silently, 6 seconds on, 6 seconds off. In 1952, as Egypt prepared for the transition from monarchy to republic, the Ministry of Antiquities announced an ambitious project: the construction of a new national museum dedicated to the ancient wonders buried beneath the sands. One of its planned exhibits was to be a subterranean wing called the Royal Subterranean Museum. Built beneath the Giza Plateau itself, the British Museum, eager to maintain ties with post-colonial Egypt, offered technical assistance. In private correspondence, the proposed wing was described as a permanent installation to display recovered materials from the GE-34 excavation. Construction began quietly the following year. Surveyors marked out a rectangular section of land roughly 500 meters north of the Great Pyramid. Tunneling machines, newly imported from France, began cutting through the limestone in July 1953. Then the engineers encountered a layer of rock, unlike anything recorded in the geological maps. When struck with a hammer, it produced a clear, metallic tone. Instruments registered faint electrical charge on contact. Still, they continued digging. The foreman later reported that workers began complaining of headaches and a faint buzzing that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. When the first power generators were installed underground, their voltage meters fluctuated violently, though no equipment was connected. At night, guards stationed at the tunnel entrance claimed to hear a rhythmic hum echoing through the shaft, matching the 6-second pattern that by then had become a familiar but forbidden topic among Egypt's scientists. On the evening of December 9th, 1953, a surge tore through the system. Lights flickered across the entire construction site. Several workers described seeing a flash of bluish light rise from the tunnel mouth, followed by a sound like deep thunder. When power returned, the machinery was dead, motors fused, cables melted. The temperature inside the excavation chamber had risen by nearly 20 degrees. A faint smell of ozone hung in the air. The site was sealed immediately. An internal memo from the ministry's engineering department dated 2 days later stated that unexplained electrical feedback has compromised safety of lower levels and recommended permanent suspension. The project was abandoned within weeks. The proposed museum wing was quietly removed from all public records. Years later, a surviving architect from the project, interviewed anonymously, described what happened in more detail. He said that before the surge, the workers had reached a natural cavity, an ancient chamber untouched by tools. The walls were perfectly smooth, and in the center stood a single monolithic block, black and featureless. When one of the men placed his hand against it, His wristwatch stopped. The light bulbs dimmed, then flared. Seconds later came the flash. The block was never recovered. The chamber was refilled with concrete and sand. By 1960, the area was fenced off and labelled as restricted geological terrain. The official reason? Subsidence risk. But the site workers who had been there refused to approach it again. One of them later told a reporter, "The ground itself was breathing. When we poured the cement, it shook." No public mention of the Royal Subterranean Museum has appeared since. Blueprints in the National Archive show a rectangular outline leading nowhere, ending abruptly in a thick black mark. It remains one of Cairo's many unacknowledged secrets, a museum of silence buried within the earth. To this day, engineers performing underground scans at Giza detect faint electromagnetic disturbances in that same location, rising and falling every 6 seconds, as though the unbuilt museum had inherited the pulse of the thing it was meant to contain. By the early 1970 seconds, Egypt had become a hub for experimental remote sensing. Cold War technologies, infrared scanners, aerial photography, and early satellite imaging were being quietly repurposed by archaeologists to search beneath the sands. In 1974, one such project, funded by a French-Egyptian research consortium, aimed to map thermal signatures across the Giza Plateau. The goal was simple: identify hidden chambers by tracing pockets of trapped heat after sundown. But what they recorded on the night of July 18th would never appear in any published report. At precisely 11:42 p.m., the survey plane passed directly over the Great Pyramid at an altitude of 1,200 meters. The infrared camera, fitted with a germanium lens sensitive to long-wave radiation, captured a sequence of 36 exposures over the course of 4 minutes. The first frames were routine dark sand, cooling limestone, the faint outlines of buried structures. Then the pyramid's northern face brightened unexpectedly, a narrow vertical line glowing hot where the stone should have been uniformly cold. The anomaly extended downward from the base of the pyramid, tracing a straight path beneath the plateau. Technicians aboard the aircraft thought it was an equipment flare, but as the plane circled again, the glow intensified. The pilot later testified that the light pulsed faintly, brightening and dimming in 6-second intervals. Each cycle was perfect, precise, and eerily steady. It was like the pyramid was breathing in heat, he said years later. Every few seconds the image came alive. The photographs, when developed the next morning, revealed something even stranger. The glow appeared not as a single line but as 2 parallel streaks running side by side, converging into a wider patch near the pyramid's foundation. When processed through density filters, that patch resolved into a circular outline almost 20 meters wide, exactly where the 1,934 shaft had once been sealed. The research team presented their findings to the Ministry of Antiquities, expecting excitement. Instead, they were ordered to surrender the negatives. Officials cited national security restrictions and informed the team that the data would be reviewed by a Joint Defense Science Committee. Within a week, every photograph had been classified, and all mention of the survey erased from official records. But one scientist, a young imaging analyst named Dr. Amina Khalid, had quietly kept a duplicate roll of the infrared film. In 1999, she shared the surviving frames with a documentary crew producing a film on Egypt's hidden archaeology. The footage shows the pyramid's northern flank bathed in ghostly light, the buried lines beneath it still faintly visible. When converted into time-lapse, the illumination seems to expand and contract rhythmically, 6 seconds apart, as though responding to an unseen pulse. Thermal physicists later concluded that such behavior was impossible for static stone. Heat diffusion in limestone is slow and irregular. A 6-second oscillation would require an internal heat source. Yet, there were no vents, no conduits, nothing known to generate energy deep under the plateau. In 2002, Digital restoration of the images revealed subtle temperature gradients along the pattern cool bands, alternating with warm, perfectly symmetrical. The geometry matched the harmonic ratios inscribed in Margaret Keene's notebook decades earlier. When the frames were processed as data points rather than images, they formed a waveform that mirrored the 16.3 Hz infrasound recorded in 1934. Officially, the French-Egyptian consortium disbanded the same year, citing budget exhaustion. Unofficially, several of its members were recruited by a private research division that continued to study thermal interference phenomena in mineral environments. Khalid, who kept silent for most of her life, later admitted to colleagues that the photographs were not the only anomaly captured that night. The onboard recorder, running independently from the camera, picked up a faint tone through the aircraft's fuselage, barely audible, like distant wind filtered through metal. Its cycle, when slowed and amplified, matched the same 6-second rhythm. The recording ends abruptly after 4 minutes, replaced by static. The technicians thought the equipment had failed. But Dr. Khalid disagreed. "It stopped," she said quietly, "because something below us listened back." For most of his 40-year career, Yusuf Nader was invisible, the kind of museum archivist whose name never appeared on plaques or reports. He began as a clerk in the Egyptian Museum's Records Office in 1968 and retired in 2008, having catalogued over 300,000 pages of excavation documents. But among the staff, he was known for one eccentric habit. He never worked in silence. Every night after closing, he played a small radio tuned to low static, saying it helped him keep the quiet from listening. It wasn't until his final year that Nader revealed why. According to his handwritten memoir, discovered after his death in 2013, he had been the custodian of several restricted files labeled GE34 Confidential Do Not Duplicate. These included transcripts, magnetic readings, and personal letters from the 1,934 Giza expedition. He was responsible for their preservation, yet he claimed the files resisted it. "Paper should lie still," he wrote, "but these pages hum." He described nights when the folders seemed to shift slightly on their own, the edges curling as though breathing. He blamed the old climate control until he began noticing a pattern the movement always repeated in intervals of 6 seconds. On one occasion, while copying an old letter from Colonel Vance to the British Museum, the carbon sheet beneath his typewriter began vibrating faintly, leaving blurred duplicates of each line. He later realized the distortions matched the rhythm of the documented field pulses. The confession continues with growing unease. Nader wrote of a specific document, the redacted journal of Dr. Amin el-Masri, which he found misfiled under miscellaneous geology. The final paragraph of that journal ended mid-sentence. "The field does not decay. It transfers itself through." The rest of the page was blank, but when Nader held it to the light, faint traces of handwriting appeared, written in reverse on the next sheet, as if impressed by invisible force. The words were impossible to ignore. Paper, metal, flesh. He stopped reading at that line. In his memoir, Nader recalled an incident in June 1994 when power was lost during a storm. Alone in the basement, he heard a soft, rhythmic tapping from the shelves. Thinking water was leaking through the ceiling, he approached with a flashlight. The sound grew louder. 3 taps. Pause. 3 again, coming from the cabinet that held the GE34 records. When he opened it, the radio static on his desk upstairs cut off abruptly, as if silenced mid-breath. The air around him felt charged, his hair rising slightly. He locked the cabinet and left, refusing to return until morning. The following day, every clock in the archive room had stopped at 2:14 a.m., the same time as the tremor recorded beneath the pyramid 60 years earlier. Nader's health declined soon afterward. He reported hearing faint low-frequency tones at night, even outside the museum. His doctors called it tinnitus, but he described it differently. "It isn't in my ears, it's in the walls." After his death, colleagues sorting his office found a locked drawer containing two objects: a small copper amulet shaped like a spiral and a strip of magnetic tape labelled Breath 1934, Playback Dangerous. The tape was sent to the National Archive and placed under restricted access. His last diary entry, dated 2 weeks before his death, reads, "The hum is stronger this year. It knows I am listening again. When I leave, perhaps it will follow the next caretaker instead. It does not end. It waits." The screed of cons, those who now work the night shift in that same archive sometimes hear the faint click of a typewriter from a locked room. The sound repeats 6 seconds apart, always finishing the same unfinished line. The paper breathes. In the quiet depression of Wadi el-Natrun, where salt lakes shimmer like mirrors and the desert hums with invisible heat, Egypt's scientific community has long maintained hidden laboratories for seismic and radio testing. One such compound, disguised as a geological survey station, became the setting of the most controversial experiment in modern Egyptology. It began in 1984, when physicist Dr. Leila Morcos, then already known for her work on the Giza resonance anomaly, received fragments of copper mesh and vitrified limestone, transferred under military order from the sealed Cairo Vault. The shipment arrived with no documentation except a typed note reading, "Observe only under controlled frequency." Morcos assembled a team of 6 researchers and installed the materials inside a vacuum-insulated chamber designed for low-frequency acoustics. Using a variable infrasound generator, she planned to expose the samples to gradual frequency sweeps, searching for the tone that matched their internal resonance. For days, nothing happened. The copper remained inert, the stone cold. Then, at precisely 16.3 Hz, the same figure recorded by the Vance expedition 50 years earlier, the instruments began to drift. Magnetic sensors registered spontaneous current. The copper mesh trembled ever so slightly, producing a vibration that could be both heard and felt. The team increased amplitude by half a decibel. The room temperature dropped 3 degrees. Static crawled across the oscilloscope in repeating 6-second waves. Morcos ordered the generator shut down, but even after power was cut, the readings continued for another 42 seconds before slowly fading away. The stone, when touched, felt warm to the hand, as though it had stored energy. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Then her assistant whispered, "It is remembering." Encouraged but cautious, Morcos repeated the test 3 nights later, recording every detail. The oscillation returned, perfectly stable, repeating at 6-second intervals. When they placed a sealed microphone inside the chamber, it captured a faint rhythmic sound. Not mechanical, not airflow, something closer to the rise and fall of breath. Her report described it clinically as self-sustaining acoustic coupling of unknown origin. But in her private notebook, later confiscated, she wrote, "The field feels aware. The tone pauses when we hold our breath." Word of the experiment reached the Ministry of Scientific Research within weeks. Officials visited under the guise of an inspection, then quietly removed the equipment and samples for further analysis. The compound remained under surveillance for months afterward. Morcos was reassigned to the University of Alexandria and instructed to cease all work relating to infrasound. She obeyed publicly, but privately she continued reviewing the data. In the surviving graphs later leaked to a French journal, she noted a remarkable correlation between frequency and geometry. When plotted, the amplitude waves formed the same spiral ratios seen in the Lost Map of Herodotus and in Keen's sketches. By early 1985, rumours circulated that the recovered materials from Giza could convert ambient vibration into electrical charge, a form of piezoelectric resonance unknown to conventional physics. Military engineers attempted to replicate the effect using synthetic composites, but none retained the 6-second rhythm. Without the original fragments, the experiment remained incomplete. In 1986, Morcos disappeared for 6 weeks. When she returned, she told colleagues she had been in the desert, listening. Her notebooks from that period contain only brief, disjointed phrases: breath constant, heat, pulse, pattern follows heart. She resigned the following year, moving to a monastery in Wadi el-Natrun where she lived in silence until her death in 2004. Visitors recall that her cell was lined with copper wire and that she kept a small fragment of grey stone on her desk. After her death, her successor at the university received a package with no return address. Inside was a single page of handwritten numbers, frequency data beginning at 16.3 Hz, decreasing slightly with each line until the final entry at 15.9. Beside it, one note in her delicate script: "It's slowing." Today, technicians at the Wadi el-Natrun seismic station occasionally report an unexplained background tone in their recordings. It rises and falls every 6 seconds, faint but steady, as if the desert itself still echoes the experiment that was never meant to happen. When digital storage became commonplace in the 1990 seconds, Egypt's Ministry of Culture began converting decades of analog research into centralized servers, a project known internally as the Pulse Archive. The goal was to consolidate field recordings, seismic readings, and electromagnetic data from every archaeological survey across the country. Few outside the ministry realized that among the hundreds of reels and tapes were the sealed GE34 materials from 1934. The dataset, marked Restricted Acoustic, contained roughly 60 hours of audio from the pyramid site, most of it static and environmental noise, but hidden within those layers lay the faint heartbeat of history. Technicians assigned to digitize the material in 1997 noticed something strange. Whenever they paused playback, the waveform on screen continued to oscillate for several seconds as though the recording were generating its own signal. Thinking it was software feedback, they replaced the hardware. The anomaly persisted. Each file contained an embedded modulation at 16.3 Hz, repeating every 6 seconds. When visualized, the pattern resembled the spiral diagrams from Keene's notebook. The engineers tried filtering it out, but the signal would reappear at slightly shifted frequencies. It behaved less like noise and more like a living pulse adapting to its environment. The supervising data scientist, Mahmoud Attia, decided to isolate 1 minute of the signal and feed it into a spectrographic analyzer. The resulting image formed concentric rings intersected by diagonal lines, an exact match to a relief found inside the king's chamber, depicting waves of light beneath an outstretched hand. Over the next months, more anomalies appeared. Hard drives containing the GE34 data exhibited unexplained charge buildup. One overheated and failed during upload, yet temperature sensors in the room recorded a sudden drop of 4 degrees at the moment of failure. There, the team discovered something unprecedented. The frequency of the embedded tone fluctuated according to the lunar cycle, intensifying during the full moon when tidal gravity slightly compresses the Earth's crust. The pulse seemed to respond to celestial rhythm, as if the pyramid were attuned to planetary motion. Attia proposed that the ancient builders had constructed a resonant cavity capable of modulating natural infrasound to maintain structural stability. Officials feared renewed myths of machines beneath the pyramid. In 2005, after years of silence, an internal audit of the Pulse archive revealed a new folder automatically generated by the system itself. It bore no user signature and was time-stamped 214A, the same time as the 1934 Tremor. Inside was a single audio file named Breath 1934 Wave. No one admitted to creating it. The file length was exactly 6 minutes. When played through a spectrum analyzer, the waveform displayed an intricate pulse pattern oscillating between 16.3 and 15.9 Hz. The same gradual slowdown recorded in Dr. Morcos's final notes. The The playback room filled with low vibration, barely audible but palpable through the floor. Instruments on nearby desks began to hum in sympathy, computer fans, lamp filaments, even metal shelving vibrating in rhythm. After 6 minutes, the tones ceased abruptly, leaving behind the faint smell of ozone. When technicians examined the speakers, they found the cones undamaged yet magnetized. The ministry sealed the lab and erased the public portions of the database, citing data contamination. But a single engineer, before leaving, transferred the spectrographic image to a personal drive. When inverted and enhanced, it revealed something unsettling. A series of faint shapes within the concentric rings, figures resembling human silhouettes, curved as though exhaling. No one has confirmed the authenticity of that image, but among Egypt's researchers it is whispered that the Pulse archive still exists, buried in an encrypted network, reachable only by those who know the frequency. Late at night, when the system runs automated maintenance, servers in the old data center emit a low rhythmic hum that no one can trace. It lasts exactly 6 seconds on, 6 seconds off. By the early 2010 seconds, Egypt's new generation of physicists began quietly revisiting the suppressed datasets. Among them was Dr. Karim Salama, a mathematician and acoustics expert at Ain Shams University, who had spent years studying harmonic resonance in geological formations. When he gained limited access to declassified fragments of the Pulse archive, he noticed something that others had missed. Within the 6-second rhythm of the Giza frequency, there existed a smaller modulation fractions of oscillations that repeated in ratios consistent with biological respiration. Salama called it the breath equation, a theoretical model describing how infrasound could imitate the expansion and contraction patterns of living tissue. His hypothesis was audacious. The Great Pyramid's inner chambers might have been tuned not for ritual or astronomy, but to maintain a dynamic equilibrium between internal air pressure and the Earth's natural resonant frequency. He published a sanitized version of his findings in an engineering journal, omitting any reference to 1934 or the archived frequencies. The paper was dismissed as speculative acoustics, but privately Salama continued refining the equation. Using harmonic analysis software, he derived a constant 6.003 seconds per pressure cycle. When expressed as a waveform, it formed a double helix, a pattern uncannily similar to human DNA. He began to wonder whether the builders had discovered natural ratios of resonance long before modern biology. To test the idea, Salama constructed a miniature replica of the pyramid from limestone composite and embedded copper filaments through its core. When he exposed it to controlled sound waves, the model vibrated at exactly 16.3 Hz, generating microcurrents measurable by sensors. More startlingly, when he reduced amplitude to match the soft pressure of human breath, the pyramid began producing a counter-frequency, an echo tone 6 seconds later, as if inhaling. It frightened him enough to shut down the equipment. In his private notes he wrote, "The system responds to the observer. It listens." Later experiments proved that 2 identical models placed side by side began to synchronize over time, their oscillations locking together even without direct connection. This phenomenon, known as entrainment, occurs naturally among living organisms. Heartbeats, brain waves, even breathing, but never before had it been observed in stone. Salama realized the pyramid's builders might have exploited this property on a massive scale, creating a planetary resonator that aligned with the Earth's infrasonic cycles. If true, it explained centuries of legends describing the Great Pyramid as alive. It was never about magic, only physics, an ancient design intended to stabilize planetary vibration. Yet what terrified Salama was that the frequency was shifting. Comparing modern seismic data with records from the 1930 seconds, he discovered a subtle slowdown. The The global infrasound baseline had decreased by 0.04 of a hertz over 80 years. His calculations predicted that within a century the resonance would fall out of phase, releasing whatever pressure had been balanced for millennia. He warned colleagues discreetly. Most laughed, calling it numerology. But one, a Japanese geophysicist who had worked on the 2023 Muon tomography survey, confirmed similar findings, small but measurable variations in the pyramid's internal density, fluctuating in rhythm with Salama's calculated decay. In late 2014, Salama vanished during a field study near Baharia Oasis. His tent remained untouched. His laptop, open, displayed a single unfinished formula. Beneath it, typed in English, were 3 words. "It is slowing." After his disappearance, his research assistant noticed an odd phenomenon in the lab. Every night, the computer that once ran Salama's simulations booted itself briefly at 2:14 a.m., generating a soft subsonic hum before shutting down again. No program appeared in the logs. The building security system recorded a faint vibration in the walls 6 seconds on, 6 seconds off. Some say Salama decoded something never meant to be solved, a link between geometry, sound, and life itself. Others believe he became part of it. The breath equation remains unpublished, sealed in university archives. Only one line is visible on the cover page. "All that breathes must one day exhale." As technology advanced, the Giza anomaly began to appear in data from far beyond Egypt. In 2017, seismic monitoring stations across the Mediterranean detected a curious synchronization between low-frequency pulses recorded in Cairo, Crete, and southern Italy. The signals were faint, buried beneath tectonic noise, yet each carried the same timing, a 6-second rise and fall. Researchers assumed it to be oceanic resonance until someone compared the waveforms they matched, not roughly but precisely, as though generated by a single metronome beneath the Earth. Satellite gravimetry soon confirmed subtle oscillations linking Giza to other ancient sites, Teotihuacan in Mexico, Angkor in Cambodia, and the megalithic circle of Nabta Playa deep in Egypt's western desert. Each location, when surveyed, showed similar limestone composition and traces of magnetized copper. The discovery led some scientists to propose that these monuments formed a global network of resonant structures, amplifying Earth's natural hum. The way tuning forks amplify a shared tone, a consortium of geophysicists called Project Harmonia formed in 2019 to study the phenomenon. Using arrays of infrasound detectors placed across 6 continents, they mapped the rhythmic breathing of the planet. What they found was astonishing. Every 6 seconds, an almost imperceptible wave travelled through the crust, rising first beneath Giza, before rippling outward like a heartbeat through stone. The amplitude was minuscule, yet measurable, as if the Earth itself inhaled through one point and exhaled through another. When the team correlated the timing with cosmic data, the pulse aligned with fluctuations in solar wind density, bursts of charged particles striking Earth's magnetosphere. The pyramid's resonance seemed to modulate in response, as if acting as a stabilizer between the planet's core and the energy streaming from the sunday. A living conduit, not metaphor, but mechanism. However, the deeper they probed, the stranger the results became. Sensors placed near Giza recorded a new variation, a brief doubling of the cycle every June, matching the anniversary of the 1934 incident. For 12 hours each year, the frequency quickened, 6 seconds collapsing into 3 before resuming its normal rhythm. During those periods, minor electromagnetic disturbances were reported across the region. Radio interference, compass drift, faint static in the atmosphere. Some of the younger researchers speculated that the pyramid network, once perfectly tuned, was losing balance, slipping out of synchronization. Others believed it was awakening, re-establishing contact with forgotten nodes buried beneath the seas. Computer simulations run in 2022 showed that if the cycle ever accelerated permanently, the overlapping waves could amplify into a global resonance strong enough to trigger measurable tectonic stress. The planet would not explode, but it would tremble in immense, slow vibrations spreading through continents. No official statements followed, yet satellite systems monitoring microwave background radiation began registering faint periodic distortions centered on northern Africa. The signal was not electromagnetic in nature. It propagated through gravity itself, bending time fractions of a second in rhythm with the 6-second beat. When journalists asked Project Harmonia's director about the anomaly, he smiled tightly and said, "The Earth has always had a pulse. We are only now learning to hear it." Unofficially, internal reports mention something more. During the final synchronization test, one of the infrasound detectors stationed at Giza began transmitting an echo, a duplicate waveform delayed by exactly 90 years, its timestamp corresponding to June 1934. The data suggested that somewhere beneath the pyramid, a signal from the past was still reverberating, cycling endlessly between stone, metal, and air. Whether that echo is natural, artificial, or something in between, no one can yet say. But those who have listened to the unfiltered recordings describe an illusion that chills them every time. If you slow the pulse enough, deep within the low hum, you can almost hear a whisper hidden in the rhythm. It says one word, drawn out in breath rather than sound. The Khamsin arrived without warning, a wall of heat and dust rolling east from the Libyan desert that turned Cairo's sky the color of rust. Meteorologists called it a pressure low, deepening faster than forecast. Its winds pushing fine sand through the streets and swallowing the horizon in red haze. At Giza, tourists scattered, and the plateau emptied until only guards and weathered limestone remained. By late afternoon, the pyramids had become dark silhouettes suspended in moving air, their edges dissolving in the storm. Inside the noise, something else began to stir. Seismometers at Helwan, 20 kilometers away, registered a faint repeating pattern, 6-second waves rippling through the ground like a subterranean drumbeat. Microphones stationed near the Sphinx captured the same pulse beneath the roar of the wind, low, steady, unmistakably rhythmic. The technicians thought it mechanical until the pattern persisted even when power to nearby facilities was cut. At 2:08 p.m., the first tremor appeared on paper as a narrow arch, then another, exactly 6 seconds later. Within half an hour, the entire roll of the seismograph was filled with evenly spaced lines, perfectly timed, undisturbed by gusts or thunder. The data looked as though an invisible hand had begun writing in rhythm. On the plateau, guards crouched behind stone blocks, feeling the vibration rise through their boots. One said later that he could not hear the hum, but he could count it 6. Pause. 6. Pause. The air carried static. Compass needles in parked jeeps spun lazily before finding north again. Steel scaffolding erected for maintenance began to tremble in sympathy. A metallic shiver that matched the unseen beat. Instruments recorded no earthquakes, no explosions, no sonic booms, only a resonance that seemed to breathe with the storm. By 3:40 p.m, half the city's western grid flickered and went dark. Substation logs later showed current spikes at perfect 6-second intervals before breakers tripped. When engineers inspected the copper bus bars, they found them faintly warm, though load records showed no excess voltage. The system had absorbed something that wasn't electricity. Above the plateau, the Khamsin roared louder. Yet the heart of the storm remained strangely hollow, a column of cooler air rising straight from the pyramid's apex. Satellite thermal imagery taken by chance during those hours showed a vertical corridor piercing the dust, a path of symmetry too precise to be natural. Each frame captured the same oscillation, hot, cold, in 6-second steps. When night fell, the winds eased, but the ground continued to tremble. At exactly 2:14 a, the rhythm stopped, Every sensor fell silent as if a switch had been thrown. Morning revealed small, scalloped ridges in the sand along the pyramid's northern face, each evenly spaced and curved, like the imprint of a slow exhalation. No agency issued a formal explanation. The incident was archived as meteorological anomaly. But those who worked through that night remembered something no graph could express. A sense that the air itself had been holding its breath, waiting for a signal to release. Long after the dust settled, low-frequency detectors in Cairo continued to hum softly, residual echoes fading over days rather than hours. The resonant storm left no physical damage, only an alignment of clocks that all drifted backward by exactly 6 seconds. It was as if the city had inhaled, and for a brief moment, time had joined the breath. Every June, without fail, the instruments near the Giza Plateau misbehave. The readings are subtle at first, a fractional rise in ambient vibration, a whisper of interference through copper cables. Then, as the month deepens, the rhythm asserts itself. Technicians call it the breathing season. To the untrained ear, it is silence, but within the graphs, the 6-second pattern tightens, growing slightly faster until, for just one night, it divides. The first hint came decades earlier. In 1967, a junior engineer reviewing archived seismograph sheets noticed 3 faint ticks penciled at the margin. The operator who had drawn them had written a single note. Cycle halved. No one paid attention, but by the 1,980 seconds, the anomaly appeared again, sensors across northern Egypt capturing a second pulse, faster, 3 seconds between peaks instead of 6. It lasted less than 12 hours before fading. In the following decades, the pattern repeated every mid-June, aligning almost perfectly with the anniversary of the 1,934 descent. Each year, as the sun reached its zenith and the air grew heavy with desert heat, the secondary pulse returned. Scientists from the Geological Survey attempted to blame microseismic resonance caused by thermal expansion, yet temperature models failed to match the precision. Nature does not keep time so flawlessly. By 2001, when digital data allowed precise spectral analysis, the evidence became undeniable. During the June acceleration, the main 16.3 Hz tone split into 2 harmonics, one steady, one climbing briefly to 32.6 before falling silent. The pyramid was producing its own harmonic overtone, doubling its frequency like a chord struck on stone. No known mechanism could account for it. Physicists speculated that underground air pockets might compress under heat, releasing pressure in rhythmic bursts. Others whispered that the structure was responding to something extraterrestrial, solar flux or magnetic storms. But the simplest pattern remained. The doubling always began at sunset on June 12th and ended precisely at 2:14 a.m. on June 13th. The acceleration seemed harmless until the event of 2015. That year, residents of Giza reported a sudden stillness during the night. No insects, no traffic, no dogs. For 7 minutes, the neighborhood soundscape fell away, replaced by a low vibration felt in the chest rather than the ears. Windows rattled softly. Lights dimmed. Then, as quickly as it had come, normal noise returned. The following morning, seismic monitors revealed a data gap, a blank interval of exactly 6 seconds, repeated 4 times, as though the instruments themselves had stopped listening. Government agencies ignored the coincidence, but independent researchers noticed something new. The Earth's Schumann resonance, a natural electromagnetic pulse that circles the planet, showed a faint echo of the same doubling during those hours. The Giza frequency had bled into the sky. Since then, observatories around the world have quietly tracked the June event. It arrives with impeccable timing. The primary wave, the sudden harmonic, the sharp silence at 2:14. Some fear it is a countdown that the doubling signals the gradual weakening of whatever equilibrium the pyramid once maintained. Others suggest the opposite. that it is an act of correction, the structure exhaling to steady the planet's pulse. Last year, as researchers compared the newest data, they found that the interval between harmonics had shortened again 5 seconds now, not 6. The change is minute, almost trivial, yet to those who understand resonance, it is the sound of a system beginning to accelerate. If the trend continues, the next generation may hear it without instruments, a soft, rhythmic thrum beneath the wind, a breath growing quicker with every dune. No one knows what happens when the world's oldest machine runs out of air. For centuries, travelers crossing Egypt's western desert have spoken of a music born from the dunes, a low, humming sound that seems to emerge from the sand itself. It is not a legend. Modern scientists call it booming sand, a natural resonance produced when dry grains cascade down steep slopes and rub against each other in harmony. The sound can last for minutes, spreading over kilometers like the echo of a distant drum. But in June, when the Giza frequency rises to its strange 6-second rhythm, that ordinary music changes. In 2018, a small research team from Cairo University ventured west of Dashur with an array of microbarographs and vibration sensors. Their goal was simple: to study how wind and heat could produce sustained sound in desert conditions. They set their instruments at dusk, as the air cooled and the dunes began to shift. For the first few hours, the recorders captured the usual fluctuations, gusts, low-frequency hum, and the occasional roar of sand sliding under its own weight. Then, at 9:46 p.m., the data changed. A tone appeared in the recordings, barely audible but perfectly steady. Its frequency matched the Giza pulse, 16.3 Hz, repeating every 6 seconds. At first, they assumed it was mechanical interference. Yet there were no vehicles within 50 kilometers, and the wind had nearly died. One student noticed that every time she exhaled near the microphone, the tone faltered slightly, as if reacting to her breath. When she held still, the rhythm resumed, unwavering. By midnight, several dunes were resonating together, their booming notes rising and falling in synchronized patterns. The sound moved like a slow tide, one dune beginning, another answering, the tone traveling across the landscape as if the desert itself were breathing. The following morning, the team compared recordings taken miles apart. Each microphone had captured identical intervals, 6 seconds between peaks, each oscillation separated by a faint harmonic overtone at twice the frequency. The dunes, they realized, were not just responding to wind. They were being driven by an external pulse. The desert had become an amplifier. Over the next few years, other researchers confirmed the effect. When atmospheric pressure dropped below a certain threshold, particularly around the June solstice, the dunes west of Giza entered sympathetic vibration with the subterranean infrasound measured beneath the pyramid. Instruments placed in a 40-kilometer line showed near-perfect synchronization, even when separated by ridges and valleys. The phase delay between each dune's vibration was consistent with a single central source located directly beneath the plateau. Among Bedouin guides, the phenomenon was already known. They called it the chorus of the breath. To them, it was a sign of balance, a conversation between earth and sky that had existed since before the first stone was laid at Giza. The scientists found poetry in the phrase, but avoided it in their papers. Instead, they described it as harmonic entrainment across granular systems. Yet even they admitted it sounded alive. In 2021, a satellite equipped with low-frequency sensors detected thermal anomalies over the same region. Thin ribbons of colder air appeared above the dunes exactly when the chorus began, pulsing faintly every 6 seconds. The data suggested an atmospheric coupling between the desert surface and the air column above a vertical resonance mirroring the ancient rhythm. It was as though the entire landscape were part of one vast, invisible instrument, tuned to the same eternal note. When the wind stopped, the sound lingered for several seconds longer, fading like a memory rather than a wave. To those who heard it, The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise itself. And in that silence, one truth seemed undeniable: the desert was not empty. It was listening. For decades, the 6-second pulse beneath Giza had been constant, as dependable as a heartbeat. Every instrument that listened to the ground recorded its rhythm, every dune producing the same slow breath. Then, in 2018, something extraordinary happened. The pulse vanished. At 1:56 a.m. on June 13th, seismometers around Cairo began logging the annual rise in low-frequency energy. The pattern followed its usual path, amplitude increasing through the night, cresting near 2 in the morning. But moments before the expected cutoff, the signal flattened, not faded, not decayed, stopped. For 72 seconds, the line remained perfectly still. Sensitive instruments that normally quivered with ambient vibration went silent. Even background microsisms from the Red Sea, usually ever-present, disappeared. Technicians thought their systems had failed. But when they compared data from stations hundreds of kilometers apart, each showed the same blank interval, synchronized to the millisecond. Radio spectrograms from amateur operators revealed a similar silence across the lower VLF bands. Instead of interference, there was emptiness, a measurable absence, as though the planet's hum had been momentarily erased. When the signal returned, it came from somewhere else. An independent researcher in Asyut, monitoring atmospheric reflections on shortwave frequencies, detected a faint transmission seconds after the blackout ended. It was a single narrowband pulse, centered around 37 MHz, repeating once before fading. Slowed down and filtered, the transmission revealed the unmistakable cadence of a human voice. The words were simple, blurred by static but clear enough to be transcribed. Descending now. Skeptics dismissed it as coincidence, perhaps a stray radio reflection bouncing across the ionosphere. Yet multiple receivers across Egypt and Libya captured the same burst within 1 second of each other. Its waveform matched the amplitude envelope of the lost Giza pulse, as if the underground signal had briefly surfaced through the airwaves before retreating again. Analysis by the Egyptian National Research Institute found something even stranger. During those 72 seconds of silence, a satellite gravimeter in polar orbit recorded a temporary smoothing of Earth's local gravity field directly over Giza. The anomaly was minuscule, but consistent with a momentary release of stored energy, like the exhalation of a system under pressure. It was as if the entire network of resonant structures had synchronized and reset. Afterward, the pulse resumed, but subtly altered. Its period was no longer exactly 6 seconds, it had shortened to 5.97. To the ear, the difference was imperceptible. To the instruments, it was profound. A change that small implied a vast redistribution of energy, the kind that could only happen if the resonance had shifted to a new equilibrium. Since 2018, smaller vanishings have been recorded, brief gaps, a few seconds each, spaced months apart. Each time, the returning signal carries a slightly higher harmonic, as though tuning itself upward. Researchers now refer to the event simply as the vanishing. What remains clear is that for 1 minute and 12 seconds, the planet's oldest frequency went silent, and in that silence, something spoke back. The words were few, the meaning uncertain, but they echoed across disciplines like a warning or a promise. The Earth inhaled, exhaled, and listened to itself. And somewhere deep beneath the stone, a machine older than history answered with a breath that humanity had finally learned to hear. Beneath the Great Pyramid lies a depth few have ever seen. The public chambers, the kings, the queens, the Grand Gallery end abruptly in silence, but ground-penetrating radar suggests that more lies below. Cavities and shafts that twist downward into limestone darkness. Egypt's official maps end at 30 meters beneath the surface. Beyond that, the rock absorbs radar like water swallowing light. For nearly a century, no one has been permitted to dig deeper. But silence, like stone, carries memory. In 2019, during routine maintenance of seismic equipment on the plateau, a technician noticed a faint aftershock pattern that didn't belong to any natural tremor. It was shallow, less than 40 meters deep, and it repeated every 6 seconds. The pulse was weak, almost lost in ambient noise, yet precise enough to chart a source. When plotted in 3 dimensions, the readings pointed directly beneath the northern base of the pyramid, the same line traced by the 1934 expedition's final descent. Something under the stone was still moving. For months, the ministry kept the data classified. Then, late that year, a small exploratory team was quietly assembled: geophysicists, structural engineers, and 2 archaeologists chosen for their discretion. Their mission was to lower a microdrone through an existing ventilation shaft and measure air composition at depth. Officially, they were testing for structural integrity. Unofficially, they were listening. The first flights returned stable readings. But on the 3rd descent, the sensors registered an anomaly, a sudden drop in temperature followed by a pressure spike. The drone's camera, straining in low light, captured walls glistening as if damp. The air shimmered, and then the feed went white. When the image returned seconds later, the telemetry had shifted. The drone's altimeter showed it was nearly 3 meters higher than before, yet no command had been issued. It was as though the craft had been lifted by something unseen. Sound analysis later revealed that during the blackout, the drone's microphone had captured a faint oscillation identical to the 6-second pattern known from surface instruments. Only this time, the frequency doubled halfway through the recording. The field beneath the pyramid had split into 2 overlapping rhythms, one rising, one falling. The interference produced a slow beat frequency that matched the heart rate of a resting human being. The team withdrew after that night. Official reports cite equipment instability, but one of the engineers resigned immediately afterward, telling colleagues she could still hear a hum in her ears whenever she closed her eyes. Within weeks, the shaft was sealed again with steel mesh and plaster. The project name vanished from all documentation. Later, a member of the team leaked a single still frame from the lost footage. It showed a corner of stone veined with what looked like copper threads, thin, branching filaments, glinting faintly in the infrared light. The pattern was too regular to be mineral. When magnified, it resembled circuitry, running in spirals that curved toward a dark aperture just out of view. The leak was quickly suppressed, but copies spread through research circles like whispers. Geologists offered one rational explanation: natural copper crystallization along microfractures. Others disagreed. They saw deliberate design, a lattice buried within the limestone, ancient yet alive. The pyramid, they argued, was not merely a monument but part of a vast resonant system, still functioning beneath our feet. What lies below remains sealed. But seismic data continues to detect the same slow rhythm. Every 6 seconds, a faint pulse rises from 40 meters beneath the surface, travels upward through layers of stone, and dissipates into air. The pattern has persisted for 91 years without decay. It has no source, no fuel, no reason. The silence beneath the stone is not empty. It is waiting to be answered. When the first satellite constellations began continuous seismic mapping of Earth, researchers noticed something odd in the global noise floor. Between the known tremors of the oceans and the whisper of continental drift ran a low, consistent vibration at roughly 16 Hz. It pulsed faintly every 6 seconds, the same rhythm traced from Giza to Mexico to Cambodia. At first it was dismissed as machine interference from the satellites themselves, but as instruments improved, the pulse grew clearer. It was not an artifact, it was the planet. By 2023, supercomputers could compile months of infrasonic data into 3D models. What they revealed defied expectation. The Earth's crust seemed to be breathing minute expansions and contractions, measurable only in micrometers, synchronized across vast distances. The pattern originated beneath northern Africa, radiating outward like ripples in water. From there, the wave propagated along tectonic lines until it reached the oceans, where it dissipated into background resonance. At first, the effect was stable. But then came June 2024. For the first time since records began, the global sensors registered a phase shift. The 6-second cycle shortened to 5.8 and held steady for 24 hours. Pressure maps showed oscillating energy, converging back toward Egypt, as if the network were collapsing inward. In the days that followed, electromagnetic observatories picked up matching fluctuations in the ionosphere. The pulse that once moved through stone now echoed through the air. Radio transmissions bent slightly around it, and airline navigation systems near the Mediterranean reported momentary compass drift. The world had begun to resonate with the same frequency that once belonged to a single monument. International agencies convened quietly to study the anomaly. Some believed it harmless, a byproduct of deep Earth convection amplified by human monitoring. Others feared it marked the threshold of a larger event, a planetary adjustment set in motion long before civilization. An internal memo leaked from a European geophysical centre suggested that the frequency corresponded to the resonant mode of the Earth's inner core. If synchronization continues, it read, the crust will experience periodic strain, consistent with harmonic coupling. Effect unknown. At 2:14 a.m. on June 13th, the same minute recorded in 1934, the shift ceased. Every instrument from Cairo to California went quiet. For 90 seconds, the global resonance vanished, replaced by pure silence. Then, slowly, it returned but altered. The period lengthened back to 6 seconds, yet within each pulse, analysts detected a faint new harmonic. The tone was no longer a single note, but a chord. When converted to audible range and accelerated thousands of times, the sound resembled breath layered over wind, soft, human, almost gentle. Those who heard it in the labs described the same sensation: warmth, calm, and a pressure behind the ribs, as though the planet were sighing. In the days after, satellite gravity readings stabilized, electrical grids normalized, but seismographs near Giza showed a subtle new line etched into the data, an upward slope beginning the moment the chord appeared. Energy was rising again. The world, it seemed, had taken a deeper breath. No official statement has been issued, no public explanation offered. But among the few who have studied the frequency since its discovery, one conclusion is whispered again and again. The resonance was never a mystery to solve. It was a heartbeat to remember, and if it is indeed the sound of the earth breathing, then perhaps the question is not what caused it, but how long we have been living inside its rhythm without ever listening. Night settles differently over Giza now. The city's electric glow paints the horizon in soft amber, but above the plateau the air still feels older than light. The guards switch on their lamps and listen, half out of duty, half out of habit. Beneath the shifting sand, beyond what any sensor can map, the faint rhythm continues. 6 seconds of rising pressure, 6 seconds of release. No machine drives it, no weather sustains it. It is simply there, the oldest clock still keeping time. Each year the measurements return the same. Temperature, pressure, magnetic drift, all following that patient cadence. Scientists file their reports, models are updated, graphs folded into archives. Yet for all the instruments and theories, no one has managed to quiet the underlying feeling that the pulse is listening back. It is too deliberate, too even, too intimate. A heartbeat that belongs neither to rock nor to man, but to something in between, the shared breath between creation and remembering. In 2025, a consortium of universities planned one final survey, an attempt to record the field beneath the pyramid using synchronized gravimeters spread across continents. For 6 days, the planet was mapped in silence, its internal hum rendered as a living diagram. The resulting model resembled a lung, cavities expanding and contracting, energy flowing through invisible tracks. When superimposed over ancient world maps, the lines intersected with the same sites once thought to mark sacred geometry: Giza, Angkor, Teotihuacan, Stonehenge. The network was not superstition, it was anatomy. And then, in the final hour of the study, as data streamed from satellites circling over Africa, something unexpected occurred. The pulse quickened. Not by much, barely a fraction of a second, but every instrument caught it. The amplitude rose, the global signal brightened, and for a moment the entire Earth seemed to breathe in unison. In those seconds, the background hiss of the cosmos dipped lower, as though the universe had leaned closer to listen. When the moment passed, the pulse settled again, calm and familiar. The baseline frequency of the planet had changed by the smallest measurable unit, a decimal flicker, invisible to human senses, but undeniable to the data. A single breath, a single exhalation, had left a fingerprint in the mathematics of the world. The team could not explain it. Some blamed instrumentation drift, others cosmic radiation. Yet the same variation appeared on redundant systems thousands of kilometers apart, recorded by observatories that shared no cables, no clocks. It was not noise, it was intent. And when the data was replayed in compressed time, accelerated from 6 seconds to 6 milliseconds, it formed a sound unlike anything known to physics. It was not tone or static or resonance. It was voice quiet, layered, impossibly low. The syllables carried no language, yet echoed with form, rising through the speakers like a sigh translated into rhythm. The playback ended after 20 minutes, leaving the laboratory in a silence deeper than space. No one spoke for a long time. When they did, it was to confirm the simplest fact. The sound had structure. Afterward, the files were sealed. Officially, the survey yielded no anomalous data. Unofficially, every researcher present kept a private copy. One physicist described it later as a lullaby written in pressure. Another simply said, "It was breathing with us. Tonight?" The plateau stands, as it always has, patient, geometric, indifferent to wind and memory. Yet those who stand at its edge during the quietest hour swear they can feel it. A slow wave rising from the ground, gentle as tide water, passing through their feet, their bones, their lungs. For 6 seconds they breathe in time with it, not out of superstition but out of recognition, because somewhere deep beneath the stone, the pulse continues ancient, unbroken, enduring. And if you listen closely enough, in the hush between seconds, you may hear what the lost expedition never could. The world itself, taking one long, quiet breath and keeping it for you.